All right, Michael, I'm ready. We can start recording. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Community Boards 3, Transportation, Public Safety, Environment Committee meeting for Tuesday, May 12th, 2020. We have 3 agenda items tonight. The first one will be to approve the minutes from the March 2020 last committee meeting. I believe we'll be approving those minutes. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes from the committee?
Motion.
Another committee member needs to second it.
Seconded.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, technically, minutes don't even require a motion.
Oh.
Is there any discussion? Vote.
All right, let's vote on the minutes. Michelle, can you take the attendance for us? Thank you.
Yep. David Crane.
Yes.
Paul Rangel.
Yes.
Michelle Coopersmith. Yes. Lee Berman.
Yes.
Felicia Kirkshank.
No, Felicia.
Okay. Ellen Liu.
Yes.
All right, that's all, folks, on agenda item number 1. I believe there is, correct me if I am wrong, Susan, I believe there is a member of the public who wanted to make a 2-minute statement in regard to a letter that was sent to the office yesterday. Can you?
Yeah, I don't know who showed up, but I guess you could ask if there are any public session speakers that are not for the agenda item.
So I'm going to just repeat that. The only agenda item we have on for today is the 100 Streets that we will be discussing in a moment. I know there's others in the public who have been asking about a potential agenda item for next month and wanted to speak about it for 2 minutes. I don't know if that person who wrote the letter is in the room right now. If they are, could you please raise your hand so I can call on you and give you 2 minutes to speak on that issue, and then we will move on.
Okay, that person is raising his real hand.
All right.
There is a raise hand feature.
There is a raise hand function, just so everybody knows. When we ask you to raise your hand, it's better to use that function because we can't see everybody that's in the meeting, especially depending on what else is on the screen. So, but that was Theo. So Theo, you can unmute yourself and you have 2 minutes, Theo.
Theo Chino, welcome. You have 2 minutes to speak on that topic that you sent the office a letter for.
Thank you very much for your time, member of the Committee on Safety. I used to be on the same committee at Community Board 9, and I wanted to bring up the issue because we all saw the video that happened in the corner somewhere in your district around 14th Street, if I remember correctly, where one officer of the NYPD tackled basically 3 Black residents in the street. And I wanted to bring that to the attention of the committee to put in as a resident of New York City, I would expect the committee to put strong word against the NYPD on that sort of behavior. And also, I wanted my letter specifically requested that the committee sees that the behavior of the police union is what allows the NYPD officer who are rank and file to feel a sense of impunity when they treat members of the Black and Latino community the way they have done it. The rest is in my letter. I hope that you can take it to the full board for a vote. And I thank you for your time. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Theo, for going under the 2 minutes, and 2, for your words here today. Please, if you know, look up our website, CB3, for a full board and sign in for the public session as well for then in a couple weeks. This is something we've discussed already and will eventually be an agenda item, hopefully. Thank you, but we will not be discussing this for the remainder of the night. Thank you, though, for your words. I appreciate it. All right, so let us move on to the actual agenda item we'll be discussing tonight. There will be 2 resolutions put forth. But first, we are talking about the 100 miles of streets program that's being implemented as a result of this unprecedented time and pandemic. I believe there are representatives of Councilwoman Carlina Rivera's office that are here. I don't know who will be the one actually speaking to us, but you will have 2 minutes to start to explain to us the push behind this program and the pilot and anything that you can offer. And I will start with whoever's going to represent Councilwoman Rivera's office today.
I'm assuming that's Jeremy because he's raising his hand. So Jeremy, go ahead.
Hey everybody, hope you can hear me. Again, my name is Jeremy Unger. I am Councilwoman Rivera's legislative director. I also handle transportation issues for the councilwoman. The legislation that we had worked on around open streets is something that the councilwoman, I think, really has considered a priority during this unprecedented pandemic. A lot of the need for it came out of the conversation she was having with doctors and medical administrators as chair of the hospitals committee, people who are really concerned about the lack of social distancing that we are seeing on our city streets over the last month, almost 2 months now. We had introduced a bill about 3 weeks ago, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, in the council. A hearing was held on that bill. At that hearing, the Department of Transportation was questioned by Councilman Rivera, Speaker Johnson, and another number of other members of the City Council about the concerns that Mayor de Blasio and DOT had raised previously about implementing an open streets program. Councilwoman Rivera, I think, and the members of the committee were very adamant that this was a program that was really needed, that was a program that was needed that would not be a program reliant on NYPD officers, that could be reliant on community groups and organizations and bids and other city employees where appropriate. Following that committee hearing, the Department of Transportation and the mayor's office came to our office and the speaker's office to work on a program that has now since been announced, obviously, and a number of streets have been designated as open streets. The bill still technically exists. It has not been passed. If we're trying to work proactively with the Department of Transportation, if the Department of Transportation is not following the kind of parameters of that, which is hopefully 40 miles by the end of May, 100 miles down the road, we're certainly open to revisiting that bill. I want to let you know, I can go further if you want me to explain more, but I know I went over time. I don't want to go any more.
Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I think there's some confusion. I asked them to present. This isn't like a 2-minute opportunity to talk. I asked them to present to explain a number of things about the issue.
Okay.
Go ahead, John.
Okay. So that's kind of a history, just kind of context of the legislation versus the bill and the program that has now been announced. So again, the bill still exists. It has been heard in committee. The bill could still be voted on in committee if we feel that it needs to be. But so far, we've been proactively working with the Department of Transportation on this. We hope that can continue productively. So far, it certainly has been. Right now, there have been about around 10 miles, roughly, maybe a little bit more than 10 miles of streets that have been opened. Most of those have been into 2 categories, one around parks and both within and surrounding parks to kind of open up those spaces where a lot of people already go to enjoy open space. The second area is in different parts of the city where business improvement districts are present. Business improvement districts have one particular advantage in that they have full-time staff usually who handle the management of street events. So they are particularly capable of rapidly implementing this program. as other community organizations look at this program and see if their staffing and financial capacity allows for it, we certainly would hope and would welcome other groups and to participate in this program. And any group can suggest streets that they think they could help manage the day-to-day operations of. If you go to the New York City Department of Transportation's website, there is a link on their website on how to fill out a survey suggesting streets and hours of operations and what capacity they can provide. And I don't want to get too much into that kind of operational stuff because I do know that DOT is on the line, and I think they'll probably have more specifics about that kind of aspect of the program. But getting to kind of like the last major points that I wanted to hit on, the kind of streets that the councilwoman envisions this program in going forward with, and how we are going to continue working as a council office with DOT, because DOT are the experts when it comes to having the traffic engineers and the surveyors and road people who can manage, who can implement these things and bring the supplies that are needed. You know, they're handling that stuff, and certainly we're having conversations with Commissioner Trottenberg and the entire team at DOT that's doing a great job on this, that you know, around kind of the visioning, because we believe that the main thing this program needs to do, and we hope this program will do in the days and weeks to come, because we do think that, you know, we're expecting streets to be announced, you know, on a daily, weekly basis, is that this needs to address equity in terms of open space. A lot of parts of the city of New York, unfortunately, just do not have the open space that even areas like Community Board 3, and I think a lot of us in Community Board 3 would say that we don't have the open space that we need. But there are parts of Queens, Central Brooklyn, and the Bronx that have absolutely no public space or open space. And I think the councilwoman believes we need to address those inequities and those funding inequities also in terms of expanding and keeping open space effective, but through this bill, through this program. And so I know that's what the councilwoman has spoken to DOT about in terms of identifying streets. She is working with other members of the city council to encourage them to go to their community boards and to their community groups and ask them, what streets do you think could potentially work, to get those to DOT so that DOT can do their road analysis, their engineering analyses, just to, you know, make sure that these are things that can be done in those effective areas. I know DOT has a couple of specific, you know, things that make it difficult to do a street in a certain area, like if a bus route goes along a certain street, that makes it difficult. I know they can probably go into more of those details themselves. But, you know, I think that's the biggest concern, is the equity concern, and trying to address that. I think the secondary concern is areas and neighborhoods where open streets can really provide a solution to a kind of on the ground problem. So for example, like a choke point entrance into a park, if one park has, you know, a minimum number of entrances, how can we open streets to help with the flow of traffic in and out of parks? Or if you have a particular, the same kind of, you know, ideas could potentially be helped solve around other kinds of choke points, such as, you know, we've talked a lot about how open streets can be closing down in one block entirely to all traffic except for local residential and delivery. You know, we also foresee, and some other cities have done this, you could do sidewalk extensions near a major bus stop where you have a lot of people congregating, and that extension of the sidewalk into the street with effective barriers, you could give more space then for people to socially distance while waiting for the bus. You know, we got just one example, but I think we really hope that, you know, and I know the Community Board 3 has a list of streets that are going to be discussed tonight. You know, I think we're here just to really listen to see what kind of streets you guys want to see in your neighborhood. And at the same time, you know, we acknowledge that this is an emergency and this is not the typical way that these kinds of street changes would occur, and that, you know, CB3 and community board members are an important part of that conversation. And we think that, you know, if there's issues that you guys see with any of these streets that are being implemented, like, let us know, let DOT know. We certainly think that there's ways to adjust these to make them more effective. And so, you know, hoping that, you know, we can have a collaborative process on this going forward. And I hope, and I imagine DOT will probably echo that the same. So that's all from me for now.
Thank you, Jeremy. I believe there's representation from DOT here as well, correct?
Jennifer Leong is here.
Yeah.
If
Just
they
to,
can-
I think just to answer questions if necessary, but she can speak.
Okay. Jennifer, can you hear me? I just want to make sure, is there anything you wanted to add before I ask the committee for questions on behalf of DOT?
Jennifer, if you're still on the phone, you have to hit *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear
Yes.
you now.
Okay. So I don't have anything else to add. I prefer to take questions if that would be better. I mean, a lot
Sure.
of what Jeremy said is actually, is true, and, it's pretty much what our program is about for Open Streets. But like I said, if there are specifics, I'd rather answer those questions.
Thank you. So I'm going to pivot to the committee. Do any of the committee members have questions right now for Jeremy or for Jennifer?
Please use the raise hands function so that we know who has questions.
Paul, I can't find the my
It's
raise
under-
hand for some
It's
reason. but
under the
Mine's gone too.
participants.
Mine's
it's not
gone.
on here.
Okay.
It might be because I made you a co-host. It might disappear. for you.
Oh, that's why. Yeah,
All right. Go ahead, Michelle. I know you have
I'm
a
raising my
question.
hand.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Jennifer, for coming tonight. We appreciate you taking the time, and I think we're all interested in hearing more about this program. A specific question that I have comes from some language that's on the DOT's website about the, I suppose we could say the exemptions for use of the streets by vehicles. I'll just give you some context. I was walking down Rivington Street on Sunday morning during the 8 to 12 time when this is a pilot, and I was confronted by a sanitation vehicle coming straight at me, going west across Rivington. I was at the terminus on Essex Street, and they just moved the barrier and started driving down the street, which is to me extremely concerning about how this program would be implemented in reality if there are so many exemptions for different types of vehicles to drive through the street. I mean, just looking at the website, it's local deliveries, pickups, drop-offs, necessary city service vehicles, utility vehicles, and emergency vehicles only. That seems extremely broad to me. I don't know what necessary means in terms of city service vehicles. I don't know what utility vehicles means. I don't know what pickups, drop-offs means. So if you have any clarity around what those exemptions would entail, because my concern is that this would essentially render the street closure moot if we allow a lot of leeway in who can drive down the street. Thank you.
Okay. So typically, when you say, typically the street itself is not meant for everyday cars to just go through. So it's not a through street. But anyone that needs to make a delivery, no matter what type of truck or vehicle, they are able to get into that space to do their delivery. But as they are doing that, they are also supposed to go really slow, 5 miles per hour. You also mentioned that, emergency access. So obviously if there's, fire, police, ambulances, they're able to access that street. With pickup drop-offs, it's also, I guess also you're able to retrieve your car. If that street has parking and you live there, obviously your car is parked there. You can move your car. So it's not like you're not permitted to not park there. So cars can come and go, but then at the same time, it's really not a street for anyone who's traveling to get through. Does that clarify the question?
To a certain extent, and thank you for that, but I still don't know what utility vehicle means or necessary city service vehicles, or how that will be, how will it be policed? I mean, I shouldn't use the word police, but how it should be managed. Like, it was just a little bit disconcerting for me to be really excited to be walking down the street, and then, a gigantic truck was facing me down and I had to get off the street. So, that it doesn't give me a lot of hope for the program, I suppose, if there's so many exemptions with not a lot of clarity, because people will take advantage of it.
Okay. For utility vehicles, that would probably mean like Con Ed or Verizon if they need to get through. Maybe there's some repairs that they have to do. What else did you mention? Service
Necessary
vehicles,
city service vehicles.
that would be most likely marked. So it could be maybe I'm trying to think what would be a service. I guess a sanitation truck would be allowable. They should be able to get in the street to clean if they needed to. Sanitation. I'm trying to think what else could be.
I mean, would that mean that the police would be able to drive down the street no matter what, even if it wasn't something in an emergency situation?
They may be, well, I think the thing with NYPD is that if they are in the area, they may actually come down if maybe they got a phone call. I mean, sometimes that happens and they would be allowed to get through. But like I said, all these open streets, everyone has to make sure, well, they should be going really slow. They should be driving really slow through these streets because there are going to be pedestrians and cyclists.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you,
And this
Michelle.
is it all right if I just comment on that real quick?
Go
as
ahead,
well?
Jeremy. Yep.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I mean, I would also like definitely acknowledge like what Michelle is saying. And I think that's certainly something that like is going to have to be worked out throughout this process. I think involving the community to make sure that there is that, you know, that there's clear signage and clear understanding amongst officials that these are 5 mile per hour shared streets, basically for the few vehicles that are permitted to access the street temporarily. I think it's going to be part of an education effort that we need to do. And I think the more these streets become prevalent, I think it's going to become more of an understanding. I think we've seen in other cities across the United States where this is being implemented that there is effective implementation, that streets in other cities are seeing those, you know, delivery vehicles and other service vehicles accessing it and are not, you know, they're not encountering large scale issues. And while, you know, I can't speak to the situation on Remington Street, I've been on some of the other open streets in Manhattan and Brooklyn. You know, to me, I've seen them work very effectively. You know, I think it just is going to depend on a case-by-case basis. And I think that's where it's really important with those community groups that are coming in, because if they are noticing, you know, that there's a lot of need for Con Ed repair activity or Verizon activity. I mean, God knows my internet's been on the fritz for the last week. So I know we've probably had it on my street. You know, a community group might know that from firsthand experience and be able to actively work to kind of accommodate those vehicles, you know, in hours where open streets may not be as necessary, like late at night or earlier in the morning.
All right. So I have a quick question. I just, maybe it might be centered around enforcement at some point. I was in a cab on Saturday, and the cabbie drove me through a portion of what would be considered an open street. He drove around the barricade and drove straight through to get onto the FDR Drive. I wouldn't imagine he would be allowed to go through. Correct me if I'm wrong. Because he looked shocked by seeing all these barricades.
Jennifer, do you want to take that one or should I?
You could take it if you want.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't be. That it's definitely not something that would be legal. It's not for through traffic use. So that would have been an instance where if someone had seen that, should have immediately reported the medallion number to 311 to make sure that they were at the very least educated, you know, certainly probably up for a ticket violation.
Okay, yeah. So I guess that my question is enforcement. Is that on a citizen to just call 311? Oh, I see a cab going through, or somebody's a regular car going through, right through. I see a license plate number. I'm gonna call 311 and put in the license plate number. Who actually enforces?
Yeah.
Who's not supposed to be going down these streets so nobody can get hit? You already have enough other vehicles going through.
It's a good question. I mean, I certainly think that it's going to depend on each street specifically, which group is doing the organizing, you know, especially if it's like a bid. I think they're going to have effective tools to communicate to the city or to the right enforcement officials if they're witnessing that kind of behavior. You know, if a community group doesn't have the capacity to provide that on-site staffing, we would like to see, and this is just Councilwoman's office, this is not DOT's position yet. We have been advocating for other city officials, school crossing guards, for other DOT employees, traffic enforcement agents to play more of a role, a present role in this process. So, that's certainly our position, our office's position, and, again, a continuing conversation as these streets evolve, because honestly, they've only been here for a week or two. And I know we've all, been going through and seeing how different transportation changes have happened in CB3, over the last couple of years, whether it's 14th Street or whether it's bike lanes or whether it's shared streets. Some of these things do take time, and they do have, things that change with them. So again, I would just really preface, if you guys are noticing specific issues at a specific street, if it's on Rivington Street, there's a specific issue occurring. That's the kind of thing that I know our office wants to know about, so that we can then bring that to DOT's attention, and they can either change, they can remove from the program, they can add to the program, to make sure the program's working effectively.
I believe Susan had a question.
Thank you. So I was told by the mayor's office that they're going to start having social distancing ambassadors on the street because of all the complaints. Would they be, since these are places where pedestrians are congregating, but we still want people to social distance, would this be a place the ambassadors might be, and would that be helpful? I'm sure a lot of the lack of compliance right now is because it's so new, but would the ambassadors possibly be a help to try and educate people, or vehicles? I don't know.
I'm going to turn that to DOT, just because the program's pretty new, and we certainly have the same question ourselves, but we haven't heard anything yet. So I'm just going to turn it to DOT if they have anything at this point.
Do you know that, Jennifer?
At the moment, I haven't heard any updates or details on that on having street social distancing ambassadors. When I do have that info, I can share that with you.
Thank you. Maybe it's something we can suggest.
I see two. Thank you, Susan. I see two hands raised. I saw Jim Shelton's hand raised first. Jim.
Hi. Yeah, I want to follow up a little bit on what Susan and Jeremy were just talking about. Looking at the current DOT guidelines for the program, and I understand that they're evolving, but currently, as the program exists, you need to have a sponsor community organization, and one of the requirements is that they provide staff for the street, but there's additionally no funding available through DOT. I mean, I just heard from Jeremy that there's some movement on possibly having other options to facilitate that. But maybe it'd be helpful, maybe Jen, to hear a little bit about how DOT is thinking about that, because there's lots of organizations or streets we might identify, but there isn't necessarily the people power to staff for 12 hours, because it's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. That takes money, that takes people. It's not always going to be available. So is the city considering ways to staff those positions?
So yes, we prefer this to be managed by a partner organization, such as a bid. But then, however, there are areas where you don't have a bid. Then, if there's any, there's also no community groups, then the alternative is to try to work with NYPD. They do have some resources that we may be able to, engage with them to help with some of the streets. And I know for those particular streets, if it's NYPD, then obviously they would be staffing that, and they would be, managing that during the time from 8 to 8. In addition, any community group that does apply and say they can't do from 8 to 8, I mean, the schedule for the open streets is also very flexible. For this program, it is flexible. We would definitely like to work with a partner and see what days or, what time of day, or, it doesn't have to be every day. It could be, a couple of days a week and, a certain number of hours. I mean, if that's their capacity to do so, we'd be willing to work with them on that. Does that help?
And Jim,
Yeah, I don't have a follow-up. I just wanted to hear about that because that could be a difficulty for identifying, a street that fits if there's no possibility to staff it.
And Jim, one thing I do want to just point as a clarification, the first round of streets that were opened around the parks, those are being run by the city right now. So those don't have a group. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
I'll get to Susan in a second. I've seen Trevor Holland's also a board member. His hand was up for a while. I'll take his question, then I'll go to Susan. Trevor.
All right, thank you. I guess the first thing I'd like to sort of understand is the purpose of Safe Streets, because I think we're all looking at different definitions of what this street program should look like. I know initially there was a push because there wasn't enough pedestrian space, and it was supposed to be more sort of an overflow space for pedestrians walking, but I can see from the list that it's evolved from that, and we're looking at it differently. So the first thing I'd like to hear is a clear definition of what this program is supposed to do under the Safe Streets. I know there's a bill in the council, but I want to know about for this particular program, because I think it would be helpful to let people know that you're going to see some traffic on the street and it's not just an open play street. And you've sort of touched on this and the whole equity issue, which I think we're going to face with a lot of the requests for these streets, is that a lot of streets don't have bids or community groups that can certainly staff the area. And how are we looking to make sure that the distribution of these open streets are equitable for neighborhoods that don't have groups or the resources to sort of police the area or police the streets?
So I'll give you the definition for what open street is. It's simply a street that allows pedestrians and cyclists to use the roadbed as an additional space for social distancing. The open street allows for local deliveries. It allows for emergency access. It allows vehicles to pick up and drop off. And this also allows folks to retrieve their parked car. But the street is not for, is through traffic. It's not for programming. Right now it's also not for seating or anything to encourage gathering. The program itself, I don't think there's a time frame for how long it's going to be. I mean, depending on who manages it, it's flexible. I mean, anyone that we get an application for that actually, say like we approved it and this is going to be an open street. If after, day one, day two, after a while, if it doesn't work, then we may not continue it. I mean, that's a flexibility that we're willing to, try. I mean, we wanted to get as much streets, as possible to help with the social distancing. And, as I mentioned before, any street that doesn't have a community partner, we're going to try to see what other, if NYPD has some available resources, then we can definitely try to see if we can coordinate with them. I mean, I know there's also like some areas where, there weren't any, say like block association, some of them actually start to, a bunch of volunteers might get together and decide to, hey, you know what, if we could do this for 2 to 3 hours, maybe we'll try it. I mean, that's also a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Trevor. Susan, I believe you had a question.
To a couple of that, first of all, the purpose is evolving. And I know just as we're speaking here, I just got an email that the city is considering using restaurants, letting restaurants use some of the spaces. And I know a number of community groups and particularly business groups, are discussing that. And I think Tim is, it's the part of the second resolution that Tim from the Lower East Side Partnership has is about discussing other ways to use the space. So I think that's going to be evolving about that. As far as groups, the list we have right now are ones that, with a few exceptions, are ones that individual residents suggested to the 2 council offices. And that's the list that was on the website. Since then, the only ones we have from groups, Jan Lee's email that I think Michael will share later with a plan, that's from a group. And then Jimmy Carbone suggested 7th Street, and I'm sure he would have enough people in his group to do that, and maybe even more. So part of my suggestion is that you vet the street. The streets on the list that were on the website are not vetted at all. And I would suggest that you vet those and kind of let the who's going to manage them be a second part. Maybe if they can't find anyone to manage them, maybe they won't be open, but at least you'll have your decision on whether or not these are streets that should be open. There was one street that was taken off the list on the website, and that's because the fire department contacted me and asked to have Avenue B taken off. But all the others are totally not vetted at all. That's, you know, for your discussion.
Thank you. I am going to ask the committee if they have any other questions for Councilwoman Rivera's office, for Jeremy, and for the DOT. Does the committee have any other questions? Go ahead, Ellen.
Hey, so my question is just a follow-up. In addition to vetting, what is the definition for success? So if it requires a lot of support from community, et cetera, and there seems to be variations of this experiment, and there's a process to this experimentation, how do we define what is successful and what, you know, that would look like?
I can give one answer.
Go ahead, Susan.
So we have a tremendous amount of complaints about lack of social distancing. And I believe one of the reasons for this is to give people more room to be outside and be able to social distance.
And I would just echo what Susan's saying, because we have the same thing in our office. Though, I mean, the number of complaints we've gotten about social distancing concerns, whether it's in parks or on streets, is it honestly does not compare to any situation we've ever had in 2.5 years in the council. It just doesn't. And I think that metric is important. And then I also think looking, you know, at having our public health experts look at, you know, areas where open streets are implemented, particularly in areas where there have been high concentrations of COVID cases, to see if that has any effect on further transmission. Obviously, to caution, like, you know, there are numbers of factors, public health factors and initiatives and rules that help to decrease, you know, spread of coronavirus. But, you know, that is something I certainly think we'll also be looking at as well.
I could also add, one of our problems is illegal bars on the sidewalk, which are causing areas of great non-social distancing. And if there were a way, if this eventually allowed for some commercial use, it would be under criteria and not in the sort of non-compliant Wild West way it's happening now.
Susan, there is a lot of comments coming up in the chat box wondering if you can give more information on what FDNY's concerns were with Avenue B.
I had a very short conversation, but one of the things they said was, you know, particularly from 2nd Street, being access to be able to respond to particularly fires east of Avenue B. But, you know, we've never, and I think all the years, generally we think the fire department is too lenient on what they allow, and there's often been community board concerns. This is the first time I've ever heard them say this could be a public safety factor in responding to fires, but it was particularly using Avenue B to get east of Avenue B.
Thank you, Susan. Any of the committee members, anybody else from the committee itself have any follow-up questions for the presenters tonight? No hands. Okay. I'm going to ask any members of Community Board 3. Do you have any follow-up questions for the presenters here tonight? Mei Lee, go right ahead.
Oh, sorry. Hello, sorry. Oh, so my question was just about the street on the other side of the Bowery. Is that being considered at another time?
Nobody suggested any. Well, you know, are you talking about west of the Bowery or what?
Oh, I'm sorry,
Probably
can
the
you
historic
repeat?
core of Chinatown.
Oh, Jan Lee has a proposal that you haven't seen yet.
Okay.
All right, Trevor, I see your hand up.
Just a quick question. Number one on the list, Susan, I see FDR, a couple lanes of, that's the actual FDR or entrance ramp?
I got that from Carlena's office. I said they have not been vetted at all. That was
Okay, that was just a
And
thing.
I'll just echo that. I think that was from a constituent who just, you know, we some of them literally have just been one line. Some of them have been well thought out. So
That's fine. And my second question, just being in a neighborhood where they change streets pretty often, how are we going to, or does DOT do a community outreach in terms of letting residents know that this street may or may not be closed? It's important for people to know. They don't want to go out the next day because one person in a particular neighborhood said, hey, let's close the street, without letting residents know. So for DOT, and I guess the councilman's office, is there a vetting process that involves letting residents know who live on an affected street?
I thought that was a.
So I would say that this, for any street that gets approved, it's a quick turnaround. But at the same time, we do notify the elected community boards, and I'm sure the mayor will also make an announcement.
They are going to pick streets by the end of this month.
It's on a rolling basis.
No, I guess I'm informing people who live on the affected street. How does that happen?
Announcements and through community board and electeds. I mean, obviously, if it's in the area where I also may know, so like there are some tenant associations, and maybe that would be another way to do outreach.
I would just suggest adding that to avoid the "why did you close my street" emails and phone calls that the CB3 will get if you're not at least telling TAs and residents who live on the street.
Signage, post flyers.
David, go ahead. I believe somebody is background noise. David Crane, I see your hand up.
So weird. Computer's bizarre. I was going to say, DOT, could you put up signage, flyers or something, like Susan suggested? I think that's the most effective way, and it probably is important.
You mean to post them out in the streets, or?
Yeah, on the street itself, or at a corner where you're considering some installation. I mean, people, it's like everyone's in a time warp now.
Okay, I'll bring that back.
Thank you, David. Once again, final shot for any of the committee members or Community Board 3 members with any follow-up questions for the two presenters. Okay, no hands. So the public has a lot of opinions to say tonight. I see the chat room has been overflowing. I am reading those chats as we speak. I believe there were some people who wanted to have a public comment tonight. If you could raise your hands and I will call you in order. I want to limit your time in terms of public comment to 2 minutes each, maybe less if possible. I believe before I get to that, I see Jennifer raised her hand. Did you want to add something, Jennifer, or is that by accident?
That was by accident, sorry.
Okay. All right. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people that want to make a public comment. I want to keep it to under 2 minutes on your public comment on this specific agenda item of the 100 streets and what will be this specific item. Is there any way I can see the participant list again? Here we go. Jan Lee, you are the first hand I see raised. You have 2 minutes.
Sure. Thank you very much, committee, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to present. We just had a few questions, and perhaps the committee can consider this as they work on streets throughout the district. One is that we understand that DOT does not require that the barricades be manned for the entire time that they were going to be put out. So that's something to consider, whether or not an automobile owner will move the barricade, who's going to move it back. The other thing is that we actually feel that the allowance of skateboarders and cyclists to go through these closed streets defies the whole reason that we're going to be calling them safe streets, because there's an expectation of safety by walking into a barricaded street that used to have bicycles on it and now is supposed to not have bicycles on it. When people walk into this, that expectation of safety should be there. The other thing is that we are very concerned that essentially the bid folks will be responsible to ask people to either wear a mask or to social distance. They may be not proficient in English. Many of the ones, at least in the Chinatown area, are actually Chinese. And given the high uptick in bias crime, we have a serious concern that they are going to be responsible to then confront people as time goes on. We want to make sure that there are proper ambassadors in place that don't put them completely in danger and have them as the sole source of enforcement. And so that's one of our concerns. And the last thing is just the storage of the barricades in the crosswalks. Are we going to block it for wheelchairs and people with walkers and people with canes? And that's the only questions we had. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan Lee. I don't know if if DOT wants to answer any of those questions before I go on to the next public member.
The one for barriers that's going to be placed, if it's not going to be on the sidewalk, then it's going to be against the curb, which could be a parking spot.
All right. Jeremy, did you want to offer anything else on behalf of the Councilwoman's office to answer any of those questions?
No, but I'm okay right now.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Jan. Wendy Brower, I see your hand raised as the next person up. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm a 30-year resident of the Lower East Side. I live on Washington Street, and I'm glad to see my streets on the list. I didn't know we could make requests, but I wondered if high school students could get service learning credit for being, being the mayor of the block and helping manage things. Maybe that's a good way to get young people involved this summer. I wondered, is DOT planning or any group planning some kind of training video that volunteers can watch so they understand what their role is if they take this job on? I think that could be really helpful, some pointers that you could watch before you do this. Gardens are parks, really. Community gardens are mostly owned by the city, and many of them are part of the Parks Department. Are these spaces also being prioritized by community gardens. And I'm thinking of we have some beautiful examples on our streets that would be so nice to be by, even if you can't go into the garden quite yet. And I think that's about it. I really want to help more people feel like they can be part of this and help their community. It's a really wonderful way for people of all ages to give back to the city and to help make it more healthy and safe for everyone. And it's a safe thing to do for people of all ages and backgrounds. So I don't think language issues should be a barrier, and that we can get the young people involved and get them to be thinking long-term about mobility in the city and their role in it. Not just the self-esteem they will get from helping people be out safely in the street. I understand summer youth employment's been canceled, but for now, but maybe I hope it gets back on, but maybe they get service learning credit, and that's something of value to them as well.
Thank you, Wendy. Does DOT or does the Councilwoman's office want to address any of the issues she just brought up?
I think that's a great idea. I don't have an answer to that, but I'll certainly take that and ask the question for my team.
Thank you.
And I'll just say in general, I mean, it's not just this issue, but I think there's a lot of ways we want to look at SYEP, summer youth employment, to see how that can be adapted in this COVID environment. And so certainly we'll take that back as well for budget negotiations.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Wendy. Trish Wald, am I saying that correctly? You are next up.
Hello, everybody. How are you?
Sorry about that.
It's okay. I just wanted to raise the idea that if there is a concern of safety issue on Avenue B, I think there is a need. The thing is, Avenue B is a major thoroughfare for pedestrians, and the sidewalks are very, very narrow. So if there's no option of opening the streets completely to pedestrians, maybe DOT can just remove parking on the side of the street at the curbside and replace it with barricades in order to just double the width of the sidewalk. I just observed the sidewalk on B, for example, between 6th Street and 7th Street going to the grocery store. The space is very, very narrow, and it's just, if you remove the cars next to the curb, then you get access. And it's on multiple blocks. It's the same thing I observed on 9th Street between A and 1st, which I'm not sure about the list. I haven't seen the list. I assume it's also a street that will not be available because of PD concern. Again, you walk on the very narrow sidewalk on 9th Street between A and 1st. If you remove just the cars next to it and you put barricades instead of that, you get much more space for pedestrians. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Wald. I don't know if DOT or Councilwoman's office wants to address any of what he just said.
I took note of it. I don't have an answer right now, but there is a possibility. So let me bring that back also.
Thank you. Jimmy Carbone, I see your hand raised. I'm more than happy to see you on here. So it's your turn.
Thanks, Paul. Just want to speak for 7th Street. I highly recommend 7th Street between Avenue A and 3rd Avenue. A couple reasons. First, that if you notice with traffic patterns, when it's busier, 7th Street is usually a very highly trafficked street because people will take that instead of going on St. Mark's, for example. It's also, there's no bus lane. And we have a really strong tradition of working together with small merchants on the street and the churches and residents. I'm a resident on 7th Street and have been a business owner. And I'm also been a founding board member of the East Village Independent Merchants for 5 years. I just think that those three blocks would be very interesting. On each block, there's a church. There's the St. George Ukrainian Church on one block. There's the side of Middle Collegiate Church on another, and there's the Polish Catholic Church on another. There's a lot of spirit on those blocks. At 7 o'clock every night, we're the 3 blocks where there's a lot of really great people calling out their windows. And I think that there's not too much commercial businesses on those blocks, but there's enough things like Van Leeuwen ice cream and Big Gay ice cream that their people will use it appropriately. And again, with the presence of the churches, perhaps the churches may be able to do something social distancing as well. I think it would benefit the community. I know that my wife, for example, really wants to go outside, but she's someone that is afraid. She's, we're close to 60. She wants to observe social distancing always. So if we knew that we could walk on the streets and not have to worry about our sidewalks, there's no buses involved. And right now, there's not really any traffic. I don't see that many cars going down our streets. There's not really many deliveries going on. So I just recommend the 7th Street blocks. Thank you.
Thank you for the recommendation. I know you were recommending 7th Street between 3rd Avenue and Avenue A, Jimmy. Is that correct? Okay, I got you. I saw you. All right. Next person up. Well, before I move on, does DOT or the Councilwoman's office want to address Jimmy? But I think he just simply made a recommendation.
Well, I'd just like to remind people that if they are on the phone only and they want to make a comment, they have to hit *9 to raise their hand to let us know.
Thank you. And once again, what Michael just said, if you're on the phone and dialed into the Zoom meeting tonight, *9 to raise your hand. I am going through the order. I see the hands raised. The next person I have listed on here, Boy Prince for Congress. You have 2 minutes to speak on the topic.
Hi, how's it going? Thank you. I actually was missed a little earlier, so just wanted to, I could speak at the end of this item because my comment would be out of order at this moment.
Okay, so I apologize for that. I believe you wanted to make a public comment earlier. I apologize for missing you. I must have not seen your hand raised. I will not be discussing that topic for the remainder of the evening, but we can definitely speak about it offline, which will probably be an agenda item most likely for June.
Okay, okay. It was just
I also encourage you to go to the public, the full board and public comments in a couple weeks. You can look up that information on the community board website. Thank you. Much appreciated. All right. The next person I have is...
One moment, actually.
Sure.
Well, with that being said, then, as far as it related to the enforcement of the safe streets, it could be a potential recipe for disaster depending on the who, what, when, and where. Just because a lot of people are already got a lot of cabin fever from being inside for so long, and are excited to have a chance to get outside, see some of their neighbors, enjoy what's best about New York, which is our streets and just the day-to-day life. So figuring out a way to enforce the social distancing without breaking social distancing, and then having it become something where it's just a potentially worse situation, a disaster. We've seen some of the brutality that's gone on, and again, most people have good intentions in wanting to preserve the health and the public health of the neighborhood and the community. But some people get a little too gung-ho about that and then forget about the whole reason that we're doing this is to stay safe and to stay apart. So, there has to be some type of innovative ways to find out how we can, again, enforce social distancing and remind the public the importance of that without breaking social distancing and bringing more, because what I've seen happen is someone will not be wearing a mask or not be social distancing, and then the response will be, hey, let's get 6 people, or let's get a group of cops or whoever the people are in that situation to then enforce social distancing. And now these people are the ones that are interacting with the community the most, the enforcers, if you will. And every time they do, they break social distancing, making it easier for the virus to spread. I don't know if you've seen some of the stats on this. So that was just my comment about that and figuring out the best way to do that. So.
No, much appreciated. Does the councilwoman in the office want to, I know we addressed enforcement earlier in my question. Do you guys want to speak on enforcement again? I don't know if we need to really beat that again. I know there's a lot of questions surrounding enforcement still. Do you want to address it again, or do you want to move on? Or would you like to move on?
I mean, I'll just say briefly, you know, we obviously have been very concerned about NYPD involvement in any sort with social distancing measures, open streets or otherwise. We had a letter kind of condemning the situation with Officer Garcia on Avenue D. We called for his removal from the NYPD. We're going to be introducing legislation around oversight and data on enforcement of social distancing. When it comes to the Open Streets program, you know, again, we are working with DOT, so I can't speak with, and we're advocating for things to DOT. DOT is running the program. So what I'm saying is not an endorsement from DOT, but, you know, certainly we believe that this program should have at minimum, as minimum involvement with NYPD as possible. And we certainly, there are other people in the city workforce who can take on that role. You know, there may be certain circumstances where NYPD needs to have some sort of involvement. But, you know, I think for the most part, we want to try to get as much community and non-police involvement as possible.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the next person. Luke Nadal had their hand raised. Luke Nadal.
Trying to.
Oh.
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay, sorry about that. All right. So thank you for inviting me to speak and providing this opportunity. I live on 14th Street here in Manhattan. I'm also a consultant in urban planning and transportation in major cities internationally. Cities like Tianjin and Jakarta, Nairobi, Sao Paulo, Bogota, Mexico City. And a number of these cities open major streets to pedestrians and cyclists on a weekly basis, every weekend. So there's a long experience around the world on doing this thing. So naturally, I strongly support the Open Street project, not only to ease the pedestrian movement and to allow for more space for safe physical distancing, but I think we also need to think about what's coming up next, and that we have to prepare for the need that people will have to turn to new forms of transportation as our city reopens for business, if you will. I foresee a massive rise in cycling generally. People will want to use this very efficient mode of transportation that also allows naturally physical distancing. There will be a need for rapid expansion of surface public transit, namely rapid, efficient bus service on protected and dedicated lanes on the model I would suggest of the M14 on 14th Street. So we need shared space, and I think there are many examples where there's a perfect cohabitation of coexistence of cyclists and pedestrian, as long as the speed is limited. 5 miles per hour is perfect. I would like everyone to keep in mind that the sidewalks will still exist even on open streets. So particularly vulnerable pedestrians, think of elderly people, for example, or others will be protected there.
Thank you, Luke. I appreciate your comments. Was there any street specific that I didn't catch that you said? Was there any street specific that you wanted to have proposed? I know you said you're on 14th Street, but did you say 14th Street was something you proposed? Because I don't think 14th Street is allowed to be a part of that plan.
No, I think 14th Street is fine as it is right now. But possibly extending the sidewalks would be good. I really think that Avenue B should be earmarked, at least maybe part of it. It would be possible to barricade maybe 2 out of 4 lanes, and still keep access for emergency vehicles, which is of course extremely important.
Okay, thank you, Luke. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to the next. Does DOT want to take those recommendations back, I believe? Or do you want to answer any of that?
I will take it back. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person I have as a hand raised is Elizabeth Disregard. Am I saying that correctly? I apologize if I'm botching names tonight.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. I'm a long-term resident of the East Village, and first of all, thank you for talking about and considering this program. I think it's hugely important, especially as the weather gets warmer and people are desperate to be outside but want to do it safely. I think all of us who've walked or biked in the neighborhood in the last 2 months also know that the reality is this is what's already happening. People are walking in the street because they have to. If you want to keep 6 feet away from people, you're already walking in. What? Sorry, somebody's.
Arby, can you please mute yourself?
Yeah. All right. So, hello?
We can still hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the reality is people are already walking in the street. You know, you have to if you want to stay 6 feet from people in most of the East Village and a lot of the city. So by closing these streets, while we're not making it 100% safe, we're making it a whole lot safer than it is right now. I also want to say on bikes and walking together, we see it on summer streets every summer. There's no reason why we can't share the streets together. Also for little kids to be able to be out on their bikes, you know, as long as people respect each other, there's room for everyone. I want to particularly make a case for Avenue B. It is a huge transition from the bridge from Brooklyn into the neighborhood to the park. And right now, you know, it's almost impossible to walk down that street safely without being close to people. Also on a bike, it's not safe. It's a very narrow street. We've been advocating for a very long time for bike paths there. But for right now, I feel like it's really urgent that this is particularly a street that we need just to be able to go safely through the neighborhood. Certainly all the streets around Tompkins Square would be great too, because again, we're already seeing overflow on the park.
I forgot to set the timer on for you, but you've gone 2 minutes already.
All right, okay.
Elizabeth, yeah, sorry about that with the clock. Any specific street you have in mind?
Yes, I think particularly, I hope you'll reconsider Avenue B. There must be a way to work with the fire department. It's hugely important as a street that takes people through the neighborhood. And right now, if you've been over there, people are walking in the street. It's, you know, there are bars. Yes, there's a lot of stuff going on, but we really need that space to get through the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate it. Thank you for your comments. Andrew Gilbert is the next person with their hand raised. Please go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Hello. I had previously put into the chat a Google map that is a little confusing, so I wanted to take my time to talk about that. As we all know, the Lower East Side currently has a grid of Stanton, Rivington, and then Ludlow and Orchard, I believe. Between Allen and Essex, we have these 4 open streets. And I think that the model that we have there, minus the issues with the limited hours, is a really good model. Because if we consider the potential reasons why we might want these streets, for transportation, for recreation, for just the ability for people to leave the house and still maintain space, having a network like this where there's basically, it's a lot easier to sort of have a few choke points where we limit access and slow cars. It makes it a lot simpler to maintain, and it makes it a lot more sustainable of a system. In order to make a system like this better for people to be able to move throughout the neighborhood to get to grocery stores and other essential businesses, I think it's really important that we consider expanding these super blocks out in a network. And the map I have sent in the comments, basically, it shows all of the streets in red that would not really be good candidates for these networks, either because there's a fire department there, there's a bus route, it's a heavy traffic street like Delancey or Houston. But for all the other streets, I think it's good basically if we make a map of a grid of these streets that are good to preserve traffic flow on, all the streets in between we can consider as these super blocks in the model of what Barcelona has done or what a lot of streets in Japan look like outside of major roads, and what the Netherlands does with their residential streets. For all these, basically just put barricades mid-block, put barricades at intersections. They don't have to be impermeable, but just make it, put a block in the middle of the street, and so that a car can't go 15 or 20 miles an hour and they have to really slowly navigate around it. And then you don't even need to have a full barricade blocking it, and cars can still enter all they want. They just will not be able to go quickly. That being said, if I had to recommend one or two specific areas, since obviously building a whole network may be difficult given the constraints, I would second everyone with Avenue B and the streets next to that, but also recommend that we move down Clinton Street south of there as well, extending east of the existing streets.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for sharing that map. I appreciate that. Before I move, I will continue on with the public, but I just want to acknowledge that our Assembly member Harvey Epstein has joined the committee meeting, but I will move on to the rest of the public in their comments. Thank you, Andrew, for the committee. We'll definitely use that map tonight when we're discussing the resolution. Tommy Loeb is the next person I have with their hand raised.
Yes, thank you. You can hear me, I hope?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good, very good. I have used such a street in another city for a couple of years, and it's a major street in the city that's closed during weekends for bikers and pedestrians. And the one thing that I haven't heard about is we need enormous amount of signage, big signs that would indicate to drivers what the rules are when they're in effect, so that people know that the street has a special use. Just putting a barricade doesn't mean anything, because people drive, if there's no activity, people wouldn't understand what the barricade even means. So DOT has to put up very large and a lot of signage. The other is, and I thank Jeremy for discussing this, school crossing guards, traffic enforcement agents, parking enforcement agents, they're all underutilized right now. There's no reason why we can't make use of their services to station them at these locations, at least to begin with, until drivers get used to it. And I can say from using it in another city, the rule is you can drive one block before you have to make similar to 14th Street. You're allowed to drive one block to park your car, to get your car, to access or drop something off, but you must make the first immediate turn off that street in order to preserve the safety of the street. This is not rocket science. Signage, some enforcement to begin with, and picking the same streets is all that's really necessary. And I really want to emphasize the school crossing guards. They're known in the community. They have training in this kind of work, and they're totally capable of doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. I appreciate it. I know signage is a big issue that's been brought up already today. But yeah, no, signage is definitely a big issue that we need to talk about. And
I have one recommendation, and that's East Broadway. And I think it was on the list, but I'd like to second that. East Broadway from Grand to Essex.
Thank you, Tommy. I appreciate that. Grand to Essex, correct? All right. All right. Sophie Helen is the next person with their hand raised.
Hi, Sophie Merowitz. I was on the Transportation Committee a long while back, but thank you guys so much for your service in this very challenging time, and thank you to our electeds on the call as well. I'm wondering about resources. I don't know if Jennifer from DOT is still on, but I'm hoping that we can get some actual financial resources, even if a small amount, to be put towards some kind of barriers that aren't just NYPD barriers. So, you know, planters, for example, some of the signage that folks were talking about, these do not seem like big asks. And Jeremy Unger, for you, well, for Carlina's office, I'm wondering if there's any discretionary budget. I know the city budget is tight right now, but like this is such an important issue. Like the social distancing is not happening. I actually was walking my dog this morning on Avenue B, about 2 feet of distance, and a guy stepped on my dog's paws. Like this is just a no-brainer. We need this space, and I don't think it's a high cost ask. The other thing is a lot of people are raising the issue of NYPD enforcement, which is huge. I do not think we need NYPD involved. The community can handle this. The community organizations who are interested can handle this. And, we can use, somebody earlier brought up crossing guards. Absolutely amazing. We can use crossing guards. We can use a lot of the younger people who want to get community service points, or folks who are looking for jobs training, to be part of this great community network and help people get the recreation space that they need while keeping them safe. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Sophie. The first question, I believe, was for DOT. Can DOT respond to that, please? Jennifer, if you're still on the line.
Yeah. I am on the line. For barriers, it doesn't have to be the NYPD. It could be the French barricades or the blue sawhorses. But then again, we can also use planters, because I think we do have some of those available. So it could be different types of barriers that can be used.
Canal Street.
What was that?
I've seen sort of like the rolling planters used in some of the parks around Chinatown. Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that would be amazing.
Those can be, yep. Like there's definitely different types of barriers that we can use.
Great. I think all cars need is the signal. You know, all people need to see is that there is some kind of barrier, there is some kind of signage, but it does not need to be an NYPD barrier. It does not need to be this huge thing. I think the community is going to figure it out. I really have faith in the Lower East Side and the East Village to make these streets what they need to be for the summer.
Thank you. Jeremy, would you want to answer Sophie's question?
Yeah, and Sophie, I'm so sorry that your dog experienced that, because that's the worst. Nobody wants that. And I know that, no, so cute. I know that I can speak for I don't have a dog, but I know the councilwoman has a wonderful pug who has certainly, I think, would appreciate more open streets as well. But that, I'm not the councilwoman's budget director, so I don't want to comment on what the councilwoman's discretionary budget is, but I can tell you just from like hearing from different groups that we are getting so many requests to save funding, and it's a really, really stark budget situation because the city cannot raise its own revenue. So it's basically, if you want to add something, you have to cut something else. And so we're in this really difficult situation right now with the budget. I certainly think it's going to be something we're going to be looking at really closely to see how that can be implemented with this program. The alibi being that the benefit of this program is that it's a low cost program to implement in terms of for how widely effective it can be. Obviously, there need to be some increased costs associated with it. We're going to basically look and see how the rollout goes, and we can certainly try to advocate for that though if we need to.
Look, what we save on NYPD enforcement could be spent on those planters and signage, barricades, the whole deal.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe the assembly member is short on time. I will, if he wanted to say anything right now, please go ahead. I know you can only be on for another 10 minutes.
Oh, thanks. I just really wanted to come and listen to what people had to say and hear what people's thoughts are. I think clearly we need to do a better job social distancing, and we need avenues, but I just raised the issue of side streets too, because this crosstown opportunity for social distancing is there as well. And so I just really wanted to open those up. I think the suggestions on Avenue B are really a good idea. I think what we saw this past weekend below Houston Street seemed to work out well. And I think the problem we have is they use the business improvement district model, and we just need to think about more creative models to be doing it north of Houston, where there isn't a good, strong bid. And so side streets, you know, I mentioned 6th Street and 10th Street just because they have access to the park and there are people doing social distancing and going to the park, closing off those streets. Something, they would both be near Tompkins Square if you're doing from 3rd Avenue all the way to Avenue D or to the river. I think those are opportunities as well. And I'm wondering what people, and at least what Parks is thinking, I know we have to keep talking to them around east-west as well as north-south.
Thank you, Assemblymember Epstein. Appreciate it. I believe I just saw Troy Velez's hand up, but he went down. Does he still want to say anything? You're next on the line, but I guess he dropped off. Going once, going twice.
Hello.
He raised his hand again.
Troy, there you go.
Yes. I have a question about to the people that want Avenue B open. I just have a problem with it because there was a mention of the fire trucks getting through. How do they expect the fire trucks to get through to get to the east side to Avenue D and the blocks that way when that's the only firehouse that serves like Lillian Wall all the way to 8th Street? I don't see how it's done.
Susan, do you want to answer that, or do we want to just move on as an opposition comment?
I think he's absolutely right. But however, you know, some of the comments about opening one lane might be a possibility.
Yeah, that seems like a better possibility than
which would
closing the whole street down and not
I mean,
allowing the fire department to get out.
So there are criteria. I hope you have criteria after the speakers to show. So there are certain streets, such as any street with a bus lane, that is not eligible. I think with the fire department saying they need that street, I think it's no longer eligible. They are experts on what they need to, you know, say we have much higher responses for the fire department in CB3 than most of Manhattan. They're very, very busy. But I do think extending, you know, taking the parking lane could be a possibility.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Troy. Jason Gers, hand raised. Am I saying that correctly?
Oh, there, yes. So I just wanted to add to the comments that many of the other people were making in support of Avenue B. The primary reason being that the sidewalks are incredibly narrow, some of them as narrow as 4 feet, 3 feet, even at certain pinch points, 2 feet. So it's just very difficult to even walk under those circumstances without, you know, getting uncomfortably close to people. I believe it meets a lot of the city's criteria, which is that it's next to a park, being Tompkins Square Park, as well as schools and playgrounds that are now closed. But maybe that creates an opportunity to bring crossing guards in to help. And it connects with the bike network. There's no bus and so on. You know, in addition to that, I'd like to just make a comment about how the whole program is being rolled out. On one hand, I'm a huge supporter of open streets. In theory, I wish that the city was taking a more of a decisive role here rather than kind of punting this off to the community, because what that will do is create a situation where people who already live next to parks get even more open space, and people who don't live next to parks or don't have as good of organization or bids or resources to maintain an open street are not going to have the same opportunity to get this space. So I would encourage the city, the DOT and so on to take a more active role and, you know, support the equity agenda that's being stated by taking the lead and doing this without waiting for everybody in the community to figure it out. The DOT and the city should have the resources to take this on. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate your comments. I don't think any response is needed. right there. I think they'll take it, hopefully. They're getting a lot of it tonight. Dan T has his hand raised. Dan T.
Yep. I think I just unmuted, but my internet's a little spotty. So
we can hear you.
I'm not showing.
We can hear you, Dan.
Okay, excellent. So I have a lot to say. I mean, a lot of those streets that were on the list were I wrote to both council members that are in this community district, and so Trevor, that was me that put in 2 lanes of the FDR, but I understand that's a more complicated issue. My biggest one that I want for space, which is along Roosevelt Park, the whole due-day work that's happening under there. It's already should be a shared street. Right now, it's mostly storage of parked cars and a lot of blind corners for people going off the sidewalk in the park. So that would be my biggest push. And I think that should be an NYPD staffed one. But as far as love to echo the Avenue B, both as a connector to the park, but also expanding the park. And I would suggest taking away parking, if not one directional lane of traffic of all 4 sides of Tompkins Square Park to be open streets to expand the park. I'm not representing the Parks Department, but I am, my job is to patrol the parks. So I've seen the necessary need for more park space around the parks that are already existing. And so, yeah, Avenue B. And since it came up, I think that I live on Rivington Street. I think that the hours should be expanded for the Hell Square area. Because if those restaurants plan to open and want to expand, open streets would be the excellent way, because they could have more seating and then do it legally instead of the illegal drinking operations that are happening right now.
Thank you. Thanks for submitting those recommendations to the office. We appreciate that. And that's what's generated most of our list tonight, and we'll get into that. I believe there was one person trying to get into a public comment. I'll allow this person in. Is Zest? Is that the name I was looking at? Zest, I believe you will be the last person of the night from a public comment section. Zest? Is Zest 249? I believe you were trying to raise your hand. I don't know.
I don't think they know how to mute themselves. Hold on one second. If you're on the phone, just hit *6 to unmute yourself. There you go.
There you go.
So do you want to make your comment?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I can hear, you guys can hear me or not?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Now we can. Yeah.
Okay, actually, I'm in the 249 Broome Street, Lower East Side. I'm not sure if I just raised my hand or not. I'm not sure how to raise a hand. But I mean, like, of course, like, I'm totally support, to have the, what you guys talking about right now. But I will totally recommend from Grand Street on Broome Street, and from Grand Street to Delancey, and then from Orange Street to Ludlow. I will present because the street on Broome Street and then the Orchard is kind of most of the time is not very driving street. I think it's also is going to be very good for the local business. That's what I'm thinking, because I didn't prepare for the presentation. So I didn't know how to present, and I didn't know how to say, but I think this is a great idea, but I totally support the Lower East Side for our neighborhood.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Could you repeat exactly what street was it that?
We actually I'm the sushi restaurant on 249 Broome Street, Lower East Side.
Okay, so in Broome.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is a between Broome and from Orchard and Broome.
All right.
Below Delancey Street.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate you trying to
Sorry about
chime in.
that. I mean, like I'm not a good presenting, but I just I'm really enjoying what you guys are conversation. But it's just like I didn't expecting I'm on the present. I have to talk something about that.
Don't worry about it. I'm nervous too. So I am gonna close out the public portion. I want to thank everybody from the public that have offered comments and commentary tonight and questions for Carlina's office, the Councilwoman's office, and the Department of Transportation. I know this is an ongoing matter, but for right now, we are actually going to move to the resolution, and that will be just committee discussion only. So I believe the public will be on mute for this entire time, but I think Susan wants to say something before we move on. Go ahead.
I was wondering if you want to look at the criteria first, because I'm not sure all the board members, oh, Michael just put it on. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the criteria is under section.
I do think we want to start discussing this part of the resolution, because we do have two resolutions to look at tonight, and it is already 8:04. So I want to chop through this a little bit. Let's look at the criteria. So now, as we move on towards dealing with the resolution itself and the streets that we want to think about being closed, Michael, can we pull that up a little bit to the first page, back to the first page? Thank you.
Is there any way that these can be sent email to us so then we can just look at it on our own right now?
I believe the criteria.
It's just right below this, what you're seeing.
Right, I understand that, but we don't have control over the speed of the scroll, right? And so it's much easier if we get these emailed to us and then we can just look at it right now.
Let's see.
I'm going to stop the share for a minute and email it to.
Thank you. Can you, yes.
But you can keep talking while I do that.
Yep. Okay. So I guess with the committee, we've heard a lot of recommendations tonight. What are your thoughts about the streets? I know we're going to look at the criteria in a second once we pull it back up. This is for the entire committee. What are your thoughts? I want to hear, I know kind of today was a lot was thrown at us. What are your thoughts? What are the streets that that you're thinking of? What are your opinions and your thoughts about this process? Let's start debating this a little bit and move on.
Could we agree to take the FDR Drive off of the list? I think I would hope we'd all agree that putting pedestrians on an arterial highway is not the best idea. And then the other thing that I would love to discuss is enforcement. Do we want high school kids manning or others manning barriers and potentially getting into altercations with people who want to drive through to make a delivery or cut through to the FDR Drive? I'm really concerned about that, whether it's police, somebody from the bid, a high school kid, a volunteer, I think that's should be a major consideration for this plan.
Lee, I agree with you on the enforcement portion. I think that's definitely, they're gonna have to figure this out and figure it out soon on how this is gonna look. And yes, I'm with you on the fact that I don't know if young people should be doing the enforcing. You know, I would love for young people to get jobs, especially with SYEP being cut down, and they need it. I agree. I think that's something we got to think about. Thank you for taking FDR Drive off because I think we wanted that one off. Is there any other streets you're thinking of, though, that you see?
You know, I'm also concerned about us forcing street closures on some streets where residents may have a reason for not wanting that. So I'm a little concerned about outreach not being done quickly enough to the concerned residents. And the other thing is Avenue B. Having heard of the fire department's concern about that, I think public safety has to be the paramount concern for any street. And hearing that FDNY has great concerns about not being able to utilize Avenue B, and as somebody mentioned, how does the fire department get to the developments on Avenue D from the firehouse? That's a major concern.
Can I ask, Paul, can you clarify what is it that we are discussing? Because I didn't think, from what I heard, that we were approving individual streets. We are. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't make that clear. We are going to improve individual streets, though, for today. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I was going to say, like I said, the mayor's off. This is being done in phases. They're going to have probably by the end of the month another phase of streets. So if we want to give some input into what those streets are, they're actually want to see our draft resolution tonight, not even wait for the full board.
Right. So I think for tonight, we really just got to focus on the streets. I understand the enforcement issue, Lee. Trust me, I think that may be something we put on the agenda, let's say maybe next month, where we put a resolution together for enforcement specific, especially now that we're hearing more and more from the community. But I think for tonight and tonight's purposes for this resolution, we got to figure out which streets shouldn't be open, should remain open, should be. That's what we'll be talking about on this resolution. Does that make that clear? Is that clear enough? Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think 10th Street is a bus street, right? So that should be taken off. I want to recommend particularly 7th Street because we have people that will be responsible for that.
Susan, can I just hold you up for a second? Michael, can you bring up the street list?
That's on one of the resolutions, correct?
It should be right. No, it should be right below this. Yeah. There you go. There you go.
Susan, I'm sorry to cut you off. Do you want to just finish your statement so I can move to Ellen?
Sure. What I was going to say, some of them to me seem to be easy streets to support. Some, might be more controversial. 10th Street is not going to be eligible because it's a bus route. 7th Street, we have Jimmy's group that's willing to take care of it. So I would think that would be an easy one to do. And East Broadway, people that actually did not come from the council offices. It came from people that live down there.
Yeah, I'm in agreement on 10th Street because it's also the FDR Drive service road to go FDR Drive South. So a lot of people use that on the loop in Jacob Reese. So that's got to come off. Ellen, go ahead.
Ellen, you need to hit the space bar to unmute yourself. I can't do it for you.
Ellen? Ellen? No. Okay. Ellen, I guess I don't know if you're having technical issues or something like that. All right. Yeah, Susan, I'll go back to you.
Cooper Square also has buses.
Cooper Square off the list.
So I take out Cooper and 10th Street.
Square. 10th Street.
Oh, Michael's so good.
Should we be doing raised hands, or is it few enough of
Yeah,
us? that-
I'm trying to, but go ahead and jump in, David, if you wanted to say something. Okay, I got two participants.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Go ahead, David.
Is there a draft of a resolution? Because this seems like a letter that was sent to us and then a list that was tacked on.
There is a draft reso. No,
And it is not what we're looking at.
It's not what you're looking at, and it's not a tacked on anything. What I did is I put together the guidelines and information, and then I added on below that for you to see the submitted streets. The resolution is, there's two resolutions you're voting on tonight, and those are both separate.
So these streets haven't been vetted by agencies yet.
No, they're coming from the community.
The only thing that was vetted by an agency in any capacity was Avenue B by FDNY. And they're the only ones who responded to anything or said anything.
They actually looked at our website, which impressed the hell out of me.
So then the resolution that we would be sending would be a, we find the program very interesting and we would like to suggest these streets be considered. And they were, okay.
Sorry, my Zoom crashed.
Oh, okay. All right, Ellen, that's fine. What did you want to say? I saw you before. Go ahead.
Yeah, so since we're, I guess, vetting now these streets, my question was just the vetting process, right? That was brought up. So what is the vetting criteria for assessment of these blocks?
Well, that's what is on top.
All right, can we just, I know you just got the list. Can we just scroll up and we'll go from there and we'll talk about that. And then we'll pull up the resolution and then.
Those guidelines are basically it.
Yeah, can you just go down to that bullet point list. So let's look at let's read through them really quick. Proposing organizations must have strong ties to the community and demonstrate their capacity to manage the open street by providing a staffing plan. So a staffing plan has to be provided. Open streets cannot be proposed on bus routes, truck routes, or hospital corridors. Open street closures may be proposed for any number of days in a row or on recurring days. Exactly, like if they only choose one day, I guess one day, but it seems like it's going to be everything. Or continuously for the entire duration of the program.
So I assume that with these guidelines, I mean, it would be, I mean, I will speak for myself. It would be difficult for me to follow these guidelines to assess and answer these bullet points like tonight within like the next 20 minutes. I mean, clearly I'm not an expert on every block within CB3, right? And of its community uniqueness and alliances. So I would need a little bit more resource.
I agree with you, Ellen. I can talk clearly about streets above Houston all the way up to 14th. But anything below that, I wouldn't be as well versed in. And we all have we all live in different areas of this district of CB3, so we know different areas of it. I don't know if any of the committee members want to jump on that.
Well, it's specifically why I advocated so strongly to get people like Ellen on. So we had someone with familiarity with the streets down there. It is true that nobody knows all of it, but I think as a committee members, we do kind of have it covered.
Right.
I do have concerns about this process, though. I mean, I don't really have concerns. I just don't know exactly where the list came from.
Go ahead, Susan.
Well, where the list came from was residents in general have been asking to have streets closed for pedestrians. Most of these streets are streets that residents sent in to both council offices and said, these are streets I want you to consider. So most of them came, I got them from the council office because I thought it would be good to have something to start with. As far as the process, since I'm dealing every day, all day with everything within the boundaries of the pandemic, what I would like to say is this is something people are asking for. They're asking for it quickly. It's going to happen quickly. It's because it's a very unique situation. People were very upset that the first round of streets did not come from the community board. Since there is going to be another round very quickly, because that's what the community is asking for, and city council really pressured the mayor to do this. You know, it's absolutely not ideal, but this gives us input. You know, if you pick a street, it doesn't mean that the DOT and everyone else is still going to vet them. They're not going to do anything that's dangerous or inappropriate. You're doing it not as experts, you're doing it from a community input standpoint, not about general, you know, dangerous situations or something that needs traffic expertise. This is community input that you have, that you know.
So, Susan, just to backtrack a little bit, we could offer literally 7 streets on a resolution. Sure. And the vetting process could be DOT, FDNY, NYPD. And if one of those agencies says absolutely not, that's off.
Correct.
So they could literally go through all 7 streets that we offer on a resolution, and we could literally end up with none, and here we are, back to square one.
It's advisory input. This is what you would like, and then they're going to use the expertise of their agencies to vet them. Absolutely. That's the way everything's done. You're just doing it much faster.
So, yeah. Go ahead.
I just wanted to note that Troy Velez has had his hand up for a while, and he is a community board member who has not been assigned to a committee yet because he's just joined us.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that, and I didn't mean to intentionally ignore. Okay, well, welcome to the board, Troy. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
And go right ahead.
Thank you, Michael. I just have a suggestion. I see that Forsyth Street was on there, but it had a little comma of FDR Drive put to it. But if we looked at Forsyth Street between Delancey and Houston Street, that would probably be a great street to open.
Great.
Paul, can I make a suggestion? Two suggestions.
Go ahead.
One, I think given Susan's information earlier about how the program is evolving, I think we could make this kind of a wish list that as things change, perhaps like given the suggestions, for example, on Avenue B, that rather than closing the whole street, closing one lane or removing parking or something like that. So we could put this more as a wish list of streets that we hope will have some sort of implementation, whether or not it's a full closure or if it's more of a partial closure, either physically partial or hours partial. I think that given, you know, to Susan's point that we didn't have a lot of time to quote unquote vet the streets, that's not really our job here. It's to make recommendations based on what the community wants to see and what we've gotten already. And I think, you know, I have a couple of more suggestions than were on the initial list, more on the Lower East Side where, you know, I'm more familiar with. So maybe if we, as community board members, decided on the list of streets that we'd like to see something happen, and perhaps we add that language to the resolution as well.
Can I suggest it might be helpful to read the resolution to show the.
Sure. Can we pull
I
that
can-
up, Michael?
Do you want me to read it? I have it up.
Hold on. Which one am I pulling up? I have two. Open space or transportation safe streets?
Transportation safe streets, I believe.
Yeah.
I'll see it once you pop up.
There you go.
That's it. There we go.
Okay, I'll read it. Whereas in response to COVID-19 social distancing requirements, the city is proposing temporary safe street designations that would close certain public streets to vehicular traffic and open them up to pedestrians and cyclists. And whereas on designated safe streets, no through vehicular traffic will be permitted during effective hours, typically 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And vehicles will be limited to local deliveries, pickups, drop-offs, necessary city service vehicles, utility vehicles, and emergency vehicles only. Sorry, it's my roommate in the background. These drivers are advised to be extremely cautious and to drive 5 miles per hour or slower. And whereas this is meant to address the public health need for more space and social distancing than a typical city sidewalk can accommodate, and to create additional open spaces for New York City residents where safe and appropriate social distancing can be observed. And whereas this need is expected to be even greater in the coming summer months, as residents will not have access to New York City public pools, beaches, or summer camps, and there will likely be a strain on CD3 parks unless additional open spaces are made available. Therefore, be it resolved, well, these are the two options for whether or not we would approve it or not approve the designation of certain streets.
No, they're both, I think they're supposed to be both in the.
Sorry, yeah, but so one will be recommending streets and we'll be not recommending streets and asking the city to come back to CB3 for additional recommendations.
Right.
No, I think the second one is, and if there are further recommendations, come back to the city. I mean, of course, it's an option of ours to say we don't recommend anything or, whatever.
Well, you're not representing the community if you.
I'm not advocating for that position.
So no, the further be it resolved, there absolutely will be further more. This is the second phase of continuing phases.
Okay. What did, Michelle, you said you wanted to add something in the language?
Well, then let's move it before we start doing that.
Oops.
So I'll move that we adopt this.
Thank you, Dan.
And then we can start modifying.
So do you want me to copy and paste the list of streets from the other document into here and edit it while you guys are discussing streets?
Please.
Okay.
I have a question regarding the time on the second whereas. Is it typically from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.?
Generally.
That's what it's going to be, I believe.
Well, some are less.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the tip. That is typically what it is. But I think Jen's off the call now. She said it could be anything. You could propose anything. But that is like I think that's the longest possible opening you could have.
Right off the bat, I'll move that we strike Cooper Square, that we strike 10th Street between D and East River Park, and that we strike a couple of lanes of the FDR northbound along East River Park.
Does anybody disagree with that from the committee? Does the committee want to, I move to add Avenue B into the list as recommended by the community. Go ahead, I see your hand, Susan.
I was going to say, what about the one, you're not going to get Avenue B because the fire department is saying no, so there's no chance. But what about using the one lane, which maybe you could get?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that someone had already suggested it earlier an hour ago in the conversation about language. I think it was Michelle. You had language that you spoke about how to do that, and then say that these be temporary closed to vehicular traffic, or otherwise modified to increase pedestrian space on the adjoining sidewalk. And then we can just have our list. If you can think what you said, Michelle.
You're asking for a lot here. I think I said like or some other potential like solution to increase social distancing. Something. I mean.
Okay, let's say it's so hard to do these on the fly. Whereas some streets will not be acceptable. Sorry?
Where am I adding this?
I can do it, Michael, don't worry.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I would recommend above the first therefore be resolved. Let's say, whereas some streets that will not meet acceptable agency criteria and that will not meet agency criterion for approval to be closed are going to be important for, are going to need enhancements to allow adequate social distancing. These streets could be adapted with measures such as removing a lane of parking. I think that will do it, and then we can refer. Then right after that, we'll be referring to that in the resolve clause. Is that all said too fast, Michael, or is your computer reacting?
Michelle's doing that.
Waiting on Michelle.
I got it.
All right.
Could I just suggest that you add to such as, a lane of traffic, whatever it was you said, and other opportunities for increased pedestrian space?
Definitely, I didn't want to be prescriptive.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm kind of saying we want you to look at what we haven't thought of.
I've got it all. If Paul.
Do you want to read it back to us?
Sure. Whereas some streets that will not meet agency criteria for approval to be closed, maybe we should say to be closed as designated streets. Okay.
Dave gave his thumbs up.
I got the okay.
Does the rest of the committee agree with that statement?
Could you repeat that?
You're adding Avenue B back, right?
Yes, we should, because we're putting that statement. I think we need to put Avenue B on the bullet point list.
Yeah, okay, sorry, let me read it again. Whereas some streets that will not meet agency criteria for approval to be closed as designated safe streets are going to need enhancements to allow adequate social distancing. These streets could be adapted with measures such as removing a lane of parking and other opportunities for increased pedestrian space.
All right.
What am I adding Avenue B from Houston to what?
14th.
Houston.
14th Street.
And let's add before the colon that leads to this list, temporary closed to vehicular traffic, or otherwise adapted to permit adequate social distancing on the adjacent sidewalks. Yeah, or otherwise adapted. Do we need to have more of a resolve to say that we really want DOT? Actually, I'm a little confused now from the beginning of the presentation 2 hours ago. Is this DOT proposal or is this from the council people? In any case, that there be that it be expanded to include other, street calming measures, like the chicanes that were being discussed at one point, or or the things we're talking about now about increasing, basically extending the sidewalk space, that we want them to consider.
David, that's the next reso.
Great, thanks.
Don't worry, we got something for that.
Well, I know I'm not technically a member of your committee, but did you want to add any other streets that people brought up during public comments?
Avenue B seemed to be the principal street that was talked about.
What about?
I have a few other suggestions.
And there was Troy's suggestion of Forsyth Street between Houston and Delancey.
It's already on there.
Oh, well, along Sarah D. Roosevelt Park,
That's it.
That's sufficient? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, were there others? Because although B was mentioned the most, B always organizes the most. And let's not have democracy by largest.
I have a few other suggestions.
I know Broome was brought up between Orchard and Ludlow. Is that one?
Is that already being done or no? Because don't forget, we're not looking at the pilot program that's already been instituted.
Mm-hmm. That's not part of the pilot program right now.
No.
The bid had concerns about that, I believe. I don't know exactly what they were. Maybe we could ask.
I think the bid wants Broome between Orchard and
Ludlow.
Is it Ludlow? Am I
Yeah.
correct? Is Tim here? Is Tim on the line?
Sure.
Hey, yeah, we don't have a concern about Broome. We were just highlighting it because a local merchant had suggested it. So I think the Broome Street between Orchard and Ludlow would be good.
Okay, I move to adopt Broome between Orchard and Ludlow.
So as a Chinatown resident, there's really nothing here that covers Chinatown. And Chinatown's known for its extremely narrow streets and sidewalks. And as someone who walks the neighborhood every day, I can't even keep social distancing now. So I'm pretty sure with more people coming out for walks, daily walks, that really would be, I mean, it is impossible now.
Do you have a suggestion, or do you want us to say some of the streets in the historic core of Chinatown?
So there are some concerns that I have in terms of, closing streets and closing, in terms of human versus cars, I, go with humans, but it is an economic enclave and it does rely on deliveries because it's so small business focused, right? So when you have so many small businesses that require deliveries, it becomes a really crazy enforcement issue with already clogged traffic, clogged human traffic, car traffic, and now social distancing, right? So there are a couple of streets that I would like, but I don't really know, because I'm not an expert in terms of traffic, right? In terms of those specific streets. I haven't stood outside and done a survey, for example. So I can
I'm sorry to cut you off. I don't think we're any experts. I would just say, just throw them out there and see what happens, because eventually this all has to get vetted at some point, right? And they'll reject some streets, they'll take on some streets. I might as well say, take the shot.
Sure. So Bayard, since part of Bayard's already closed because of 70 Mulberry, so half of Mulberry is already, like the Chinatown side of Mulberry is already half gone, half of Bayard's already gone. So the entire street roll of Bayard, all the way through Pell, Doyers, because they are so narrow. But that's an entire network, right? Within inner Chinatown, they're sort of so connected to each other. I'm just throwing that out there.
Hey,
if Wellington Chan of the Chinatown bid has an opinion on that, let me know.
Yeah, so this is the first I saw the list. So we've been conferring with DOT. We have some merchant requests for some streets, such as Doyer. And then DOT has some ideas, but apparently they are not on the list. I do not know why. Maybe it's the next round or there's other reasons.
Because no one put them on the list.
No, but DOT is aware of the back and forth discussion, and we have filed it.
This is not a DOT list. This is from the community.
I see. Okay. Well, as Ellen said correctly, this thing is this thing is important for the simple reason that is they are, is for safe distancing, is for safety, number one. As you know, Ellen is absolutely right. Just look at Chinatown Ice Cream Factory. If you had to put a 6-foot distance between the customers, you barely had 2 people in there. And the other gentleman's observation is correct. With or without Safe Street, you're going to have altercations because right now they had to spill onto the sidewalk and they're side by side to one another. One eatery, one ice cream, one bubble tea, one restaurant and another restaurant. So even if you want to wait in line on the sidewalk, number one, the sidewalk is 2 feet wide or 3 feet wide. And then if you want to do the 6 feet apart, I don't even know which line to wait in. And so I think that's number one. There are 3 major purposes to this Safe Street. One is obviously, number one, you need a proper spacing in order to prevent further recurrence of the another round of infections. Number 2, you're going to get into fights, as you have already seen across the country. People feel there's a certain sphere of space. Like this week, I was in Chinatown Bank. I tried to get into the ATM machine, and the lady says, 6 feet away from me. And 6 feet away means I'm outside the door. I'm not inside the lobby. So you're going to have altercations. You're going to have like that security guard getting shot at or get killed. So it's a necessity. And the third thing is obviously what's been observed by many of the public's comment today about the need for space. In other words, the restaurant can, even if they reopen at 50% capacity, they are not going to survive, and they're going to need to space outside. And you can see it's not just in US, in Calgary, Canada, they already started implementing what is called al fresco. Just check the newspaper from yesterday. A lot of countries, a lot of cities are starting to do these indoor-outdoor al fresco type of dining experience. Even if you want to do takeout, that's the way to do it. So, so there are many, many reasons. So obviously, at the end of the day, it also increased their survival rate because many of these restaurants will never survive.
Can we need to be talking about what list to recommend.
Okay.
Wellington, I'm sorry to cut you off. I don't want to be rude or anything like that. I appreciate your comments. I wish you would raise your hand during the public session to offer a lot of those good comments, but we've got to get back on to the resolution.
Okay.
Ellen, I'm going to backtrack to you, and then I'm going to get to you, Lee. I see your hand raised. Is there any other streets you want to add in there, Ellen, right now? But thank you, Wellington. I appreciate that.
No problem. Thanks you.
I just, like I said, to get back to the resolution, is there any other streets you wanted to adopt, Ellen? That since you know that area better than pretty much everybody else on this committee,
I agree with Andrew Gilbert's suggestion with like Baxter, Mulberry, Mott, Bayer, Doyers, Pell, because they do make the network, right? And it's a good network. I don't want cars, deliveries, whatever, trapped if you're But with that said, there are many small businesses within that network, and so I don't know how much it would be a detriment. And because there are funeral parlors on that last block of Mulberry, I don't know what the impact is. So I'm just noting some concerns, but I recognize being internally closed as a network.
Hey.
Go ahead, David.
Columbus Park is always, it's super crowded. I mean, I haven't been down there since this began, but it's a crowded park.
Yeah.
Maybe we could ask for some portion of Chatham Square to be marked off and turned into a pedestrian zone, and that would create, I don't know, without furniture or whatever, what would that be like?
Well, I live at Chatham Green, right, which is at the end of Chatham Square, where Park Road ends. So that is currently experiencing a lot of construction because Worth Street, the renovation that they've been doing for the past decade, it's moved down to that end of Chatham Square. So you have a lot of car traffic and construction currently, and then you add the people on top of that. So it's already a very busy intersection, and in my years of experience crossing those streets, it can be rather dangerous. So I'm slightly hesitant about that, and yeah, so that's what I will say about that.
Can I just offer some backgrounds to help you make your decision? One of the things is, as Ellen said, the safest street is Doyer Street. Doyer Street have had huge successes in the last 2 years of closing. The foot traffic is up. So for sure, Doyer Street, and by the way, the request came from the merchant Namwa. Wilson Tang personally made the request for that street to be closed. So that I can safely attest to, that Doyer Street should be safe to be on the list. As the rest of the comment is really up to the merchants and the residents whether they want it. And I think that's up to you to put it on the map to see whether they want it. Ellen's comment is correct about there's a lot of death. So there's a lot of funerals, hearses that go up Mulberry Street. That's the only street they can go up on. So Mulberry Street needs to have passage of the funeral processions on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Susan.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that block next to the park where you have all the funeral homes, I don't think that should be closed. I think that's really too important for all the funeral homes there.
So am I taking Mulberry off the list in its entirety then?
Well, it's just, Ellen and Wellington would know better, but I don't think, does it have to all be taken off, or is it just a block or two? I guess actually they need to leave, yeah, so I would say.
They need to exit, right?
Yeah, so Mulberry, yeah.
Mulberry to Canal.
Mulberry's too important for the funeral homes.
All right, take Mulberry.
Especially if we're putting.
Yeah, I just say that. Lee, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. In Chinatown, I would recommend closing Henry between Catherine and Oliver Streets. It's one block. And vehicles are able to get around that if they need to. And if you look at all the tenements that are right around that, there's a significant amount of population there that certainly need space.
What was that again, Lee? Between what?
Henry between Catherine Street and Oliver Street.
Lee, do you have any other streets you want to see adopted in here?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just clarify which streets that, because I'm taking the minutes. So are we saying from the conversation Bayard Street between Mulberry Street and Bowery, Pell Street between Mott Street and Bowery, Doyers Street between Pell Street and Bowery, Mott Street between Canal Street and Worth Street, Henry Street between Catherine Street and Oliver Street?
That seems right. Ellen, do you want to agree with that, or?
Yeah, I do have so for Oliver Street, it's really one street. So, I mean, I don't know if it makes sense to even just, have Oliver Street open, but it doesn't have much foot traffic. Probably because it's really just one street and there's a school. It's right next to PS1.
Sounds like a good idea.
Except Oliver Street is a detour around some of a lot of the Worth Street traffic.
Right.
You should probably take them off.
So.
And I have some more street suggestions in the Lower East Side.
All right, Michelle, go ahead. I know you have a few.
Sure. So I would actually, for Broome Street, suggest doing Broome between Forsyth and Allen, in addition to between Allen and Essex. It's relatively quiet there already, and there are many businesses there. I would also suggest doing the same thing on Hester, so between Forsyth and Allen Essex. I would suggest Division Street between Canal Street and Bowery. There are many restaurants there and not much car traffic, and it already has sort of pedestrian terminus closer to Canal Street. I would extend what's going on above.
Keeping track.
Sorry. I have it all written. I have it all written down, Michael, so I can send it. I'm keeping the minutes, so don't worry about it unless we want to have it on the screen.
Yeah.
I would suggest Eldridge between Delancey and Grand, and Eldridge between Grand and Canal. Ludlow between Delancey and Grand, and Ludlow between Grand and Canal. Orchard between Delancey and Grand, and Orchard between Grand and Canal. So essentially extending what's happening above Delancey Street below Delancey Street. So the streets are similar there, and the sidewalks are very narrow. And there are many, many businesses and restaurants there that will benefit from expanded foot traffic.
Okay, that's quite a lot. I guess does the committee disagree with adopting everything Michelle said? I think eventually all of these are going to get vetted, and these are our community recommendations. So whether they get put in or not is on the city at this point. So we might as well take advantage of this time to throw in every street we could possibly think of, or take out any street we can possibly think of.
I don't have a problem with any of these necessarily. Are we focusing, well, I guess we all should be focusing on, I don't know exactly how to say this. Some of these streets, there are serious problems already that we're trying to rectify, and those were like I guess the priority ones. And a lot of these other ones are good ideas, and I don't really know, what the situation is on those streets, like near Michelle or near Ellen. I just don't know. I mean, I can imagine what's near Ellen because I know Chinatown pretty well. In any case, are these all priorities for us, I guess, is a question I would ask. And again, I'm not advocating against any of those suggestions.
As long as they're priorities for the community, and is my thought. And everybody's had a lot of say here tonight, and from the committee to the public. And I think that's what makes it a priority. If they believe that this street should be closed for social distancing issues, yeah, absolutely. Let's give it a shot. Wayne Gretzky said you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So we might as well take a shot at it. If it's a priority for the community, for for the members of CB3, it's a priority for us. And if it gets whittled down, it gets whittled down. That's my opinion.
I just also want to say this is temporary. You're not closing it forever. This is only where they're in this situation where we need the space.
All right. Thank you, Susan. From the committee, any other streets we want to think of putting on or taking off? I'm going to move to adopt to take off East 12th and Zold. There's not a lot of foot traffic right there between Jacob Reese and Haven Plaza, but there's a lot of car use because of Con Edison and the power plant. They've slowly encroached on all of our land up here. So there's lots of trucks, lots of construction going on around PS 34. It just doesn't make sense to have East 12th and Zold as a closed street because so many people, we got to make that left to come around anyway to get back out. I understand it's kind of like this throwaway street a little bit, but it's really important, especially if you're coming around from 13th and all the Con Edison people are using it and whatnot. And it gets busy. It's not a lot of foot traffic from a social distancing standpoint. The sidewalks are pretty wide on 12th between Zold and D. Mainly because I can see it from outside my window. I moved to strike that off the list. Does anybody disagree with me or? Yeah, we're okay. Thank you. I'm just gonna say this is the first time we're taking a crack at this. This is gonna be more discussions, more ways of doing things. Not everything's got to get resolved tonight. This is just the first step in a process that's going to be ongoing for a while. And who knows how this metamorphosizes over the next few months and what this really does for us. But it gives us, I think our priorities have changed now as a transportation committee. I think this kind of shifts itself up to the top a little bit before to what we were discussing before. Now we're going after different things just because of what this pandemic has done. So from the committee, is there any other streets we want to put in? Or can we just say, or can we look at adopting this resolution and voting on it? Is there any other language we want to put in? Jim, I see that you raised your hand. I will take your question.
I think this may be something to just flag and consider for the future, especially if you're going to come back to this. But I just want to note there were at least 3 or 4 instances where people brought up the need for better signage in 2 instances, better signage for drivers, and then better notification for residents that their street will be closed. You might want to just flag that and save it for a future resolution, but I just want to note that that was a concern. It's not addressed in the resolution, but maybe save it for future consideration.
Thank you, Jim. No, definitely. The signage is definitely, I think what I took out of so far what a lot of the public is saying was signage and enforcement was the outside of what streets need to be chosen. I think signage and enforcement seem to be the top 2 after this. So I think those will eventually have some resolutions towards them and based on what's going on. Thank you, Jim. So are we ready to read this through?
Please.
Michelle, take it away.
Susan, you got somewhere to be? What are you doing?
We have a whole nother resolution.
I know.
Like take an hour or 2.
Okay, I'll start off. To support recommending designated streets to DOT for inclusion in the Safe Streets program. Whereas in response to COVID-19 social distancing requirements, the city is proposing temporary safe street designations that would close certain public streets to vehicular traffic and open them up to pedestrians and cyclists. And whereas on designated safe streets, no through vehicular traffic will be permitted during effective hours, typically 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and vehicles will be limited to local deliveries, pickups, drop-offs, necessary city service vehicles, utility vehicles, and emergency vehicles only. These drivers are advised to be extremely cautious and to drive 5 miles per hour or slower. And whereas this is meant to address the public health need for more space and social distancing than a typical city sidewalk can accommodate, and to create additional open spaces for New York City residents where safe and appropriate social distancing can be observed. And whereas this need is expected to be even greater in the coming summer months, as residents will not have access to New York City public school, pools, beaches, or summer camps, and there will likely be a strain on CD3 parks unless additional open spaces are made available. Whereas some streets that will not meet agency or criteria for approval to be closed as designated safe streets are going to need enhancements to allow adequate social distancing. These streets could be adapted with measures such as removing a lane of parking and other opportunities for increased pedestrian space. Therefore, be it resolved, Community Board 3 recommends the designation of the following streets as safe streets to be temporarily closed to vehicular traffic or otherwise adapted to permit adequate social distancing on the adjacent sidewalks. Therefore, be it further resolved, the city should return to Community Board 3 with any additional proposals for safe street designations going forward. Let me run through the list of streets. East Broadway between Essex, Rutgers, and Clinton Street, adjacent to Seward Park. 7th Street between 3rd Avenue and Avenue A. Avenue B between Houston Street and 14th Street. Governor Street between Madison Street and Water Street. Stanton Street between Allen Street and Essex Street. And Essex Street and Pitt Street. Allen Street and Essex Street and Essex Street and Pitt Street. Stuyvesant Street. 1st Street between Bowery and Houston Street, where it concludes at Ludlow. 5th Street from Bowery to 1st Avenue, Avenue A to Avenue B, Avenue D to the roundabout at Avenue C. 6th Street from between Avenue A to the East River Park. 11th Street between 3rd Avenue and 4th Avenue. Forsyth Street between Delancey Street and Houston Street. Bayard Street between Mulberry Street and Bowery. Pell Street between Mott Street and Bowery. Doyer Street between Pell Street and Bowery, Mott Street between Canal Street and Worth Street, Henry Street between Catherine Street and Oliver Street, Broome Street between Forsyth Street and Allen Street, and Broome Street between Allen Street and Essex Street, Hester Street between Forsyth and Allen, and Hester between Allen and Essex, Division between Canal and Bowery, Eldridge between Delancey and Grand, Eldridge between Grand and Canal, Ludlow between Delancey and Grand, and Ludlow between Grand and Canal, Orchard between Delancey and Grand, and Orchard between Grand and Canal.
Is that all?
You want some more?
Let's just give him the whole CB3. That might be the best way to go about it. Should we add anything in terms of, and David, help me out here. Should we add anything about outreach by when the streets are chosen by DOT or the powers that be into this resolution about saying something about outreach to the community, to the streets that will be affected?
I don't know. I don't know that would add to it. I mean, I typically, if you're asking like what I would have done, you know, when I was chair, I would be, if DOT said pretty strongly, we'll take that back, I would just leave it unless it's something we really wanted to memorialize because we wanted it done. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So thank you,
getting
David.
late.
Yeah, thank you, David. That was just a thought because I saw it in the chat. I saw Trevor bring it up in the chat, and I thought about it too. Is there anything about from the committee?
If we're talking about like things like signage enforcement, I don't really want to ask for a lot of signage enforcement personally.
I'm not talking about signage enforcement, but more or less about like I'm going to steal your line, Trevor, about minimum outreach to the community or the streets that are affected. Is there a place for this in the resolution or not? And that's for the committee.
Well, certainly our last be it resolved, if we could scroll that up onto the screen, maybe we could say that we'd also ask DOT to help with, maybe not in that one, but above it. It's not a bad idea.
What specifically?
Would it be the concern be to get input about like additional streets, or, you know, are you seeing unsafe streets, or would it be when there is an actual street proposed that we would want them to be informed?
No, once the street has been like okayed by the city, that they should know, like that street, the people who live there, or the businesses, this is a street that's going to be closed. We're letting you know ahead of time that this is what's about to happen, and it's going to happen on this day.
So can I suggest, therefore, be it further resolved that DOT outreach the community to inform them of what streets are being closed and when?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Can we adopt that into the resolution?
Yeah.
Okay. Susan, can you repeat that for Michelle? Michelle, did you get that?
Yeah, I got it. So therefore, be it further resolved that the Department of Transportation conduct outreach to the community to inform them of what streets will be closed and when.
So this would be like as they're approved, so that streets that have been approved for closure?
Yes.
Or some sort of approval process, okay.
Yeah.
So that they're aware that there's a change.
Yes.
Are the words clear on that?
Well, we're saying.
Yeah, I think they were. You just repeated it again.
Informing them of closed streets. It's not to, you know, ask their opinion. It's to inform them what streets are being closed.
All right. I don't think we want to read through that again, even with the new clause put in. Can we go straight to vote on this? Michelle, you do it in order again. Asking everyone if yes or no for the committee.
David Crane.
Yes.
Paul Rangel.
Yes.
Michelle Cooper Smith, yes. Lee Berman,
Yes.
Felicia Cruikshank, Ellen Liu.
Yes.
All right, this motion is passed. All right, that was fun. Party hasn't ended yet. So we're gonna move into the second, before we talk about the second resolution, I believe Tim from the BID is here on the line with us. Tim proposed, I believe, went to the office and I spoke with Susan about this resolution. Tim, if you're on the line, can you talk about this resolution that you have in front of us?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. So firstly, I just would thank the committee. I think it was a long but robust discussion about open streets. Just quickly, we are the managing partner for the current street. And just to address some of, I think, the concerns about signage and planters and those next steps, those are all things that we're working on and are under consideration. The program was launched in a very quick fashion, I think in an effort to get more public open space operational as quickly as possible. And so I think with anything that moves this fast, especially during an emergency like we're in, we learn as we go. And so a lot of the things that have been mentioned today are already in the works. The resolution that we had drafted as an initial scope to begin conversations with the community was really kind of thinking about phase two. As we look at the public health emergency, and I think as Wellington astutely mentioned, as businesses begin to open back up, there's a great concern that there will still be significant limits on the occupancy of businesses in the interior space. And as we've seen in other cities, both domestically and internationally, the use of the streets for commercial activity and for commerce and social distance has been something that's been successful. And so in the resolution, we seek to expand upon the open space program that is there today, and to look at potentially those larger closures being places where we can have people enjoy socially distant commerce and be able to, for example, get something at a restaurant and sit within the roadbed, and areas where those open streets are not available because we can't close every street, really strategically thinking about the ability of a merchant to take their method of operation and apply to the city to use the parking spaces adjacent to their storefront as so that they can have additional outside space for commercial activity. There are a variety of different pieces to that puzzle that relate to the Street Activity Permit Office, to the Department of Consumer Affairs, and to the Department of Transportation. But we wanted to try to put a resolution together to begin a conversation not only with the committee and the community board, but really try to put a marker down to say, these are the guidelines and parameters which the city should consider as they make these decisions. There's a high likelihood that this type of activity will be sanctioned in some way. And the goal is to really say, here's how we at a local level have collaboratively worked together to put in some guardrails. And so the resolution highlights some of those. It suggests an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Hour window for the open streets that involve commerce, and the same activity that would occur in adjacent parking spaces. Apologies, my assistant is building something on the floor. Leo, shh. And that is, I think, a pretty good summation. Apologies if I missed any of it. Happy to answer any questions or discuss concerns.
Sure. Before I ask the committee, a couple questions, and I guess this is for both Tim and for Susan. I know we had a brief discussion earlier. What is the urgency behind doing this resolution tonight?
So I think, the opinion on urgency is that I think it's important for the community board to have input here. I think that these decisions related to how these types of programs will work will move rather quickly. It is likely, and obviously we don't know, that we'll see some type of hopeful phased reopening by mid-June. And the window that we have for commercial activity essentially between mid-June and mid-September is limited. in the sense that those are the warm weather months where we will see, likely increases in people being outside, businesses trying to engage in a new normal with significantly curtailed operations that they're able to open. So the goal of getting a resolution from the community board was to really try to understand what the parameters could be, and to be able to have an earnest discussion with the city and with our local partners about what guidelines and what kind of framework they might work within. And so the goal of the language in the resolution was simply to kind of codify what has been an acceptable standard to date by the community board for outdoor space and outdoor seating related to sidewalk cafes and other commercial activity, but expanding that to work within the existing emergency framework that's been established by the city for these types of activities.
Okay, you want me to respond also? I would say, one, small businesses are in a terribly dire condition. We're losing, some are not going to reopen every day. So I think anything that could be done that would help the businesses, and I think it would be, also I believe it's something that the residents would appreciate, but I think everybody is concerned about losing those businesses. The other thing I would say is, as the weather's getting warmer, we're having more and more unsafe, non-compliant use of businesses in the street. And I think what you always want to do is make a way for them to be compliant and safe.
All right. I want to open this up to the committee before I have any other questions. So if the committee has questions for Tim or Susan based on this resolution, please go ahead. Go ahead, Lee. Go ahead, Lee. Go ahead.
What outreach, if any, was done to the local resident organizations, whether it's Lower East Side Dwellers or other organizations specifically around, for example, Ludlow, Orchard, where I assume some of these safe streets or open streets, we've got Hell Square, and I'm trying to imagine now an open street with seating and tables, even though only up until 10, but from 8 until 10, we know what goes on thereafter. I'm really concerned about not hearing, about passing this resolution without hearing input from the community who's right there.
Look, I think it's a legitimate concern. I will just be very blunt to say that I think the city is going to move forward with some substantive changes to the ability of a commercial establishment to operate in the outdoor space. While I understand the standard and more typical concern of the Lower East Side Dwellers and other groups related to nightlife, I don't think that anyone would dispute activity prior to 10 p.m. would be problematic in any way. So that's pretty much.
I also think your concern is absolutely right on. It's things right now, things are just happening. They're happening overnight. They just, I don't know what to say. Like I said, I know I got an email, it was just about an article. I think it was like Cranes or something saying this is being talked about. So, I have no idea. I'm not involved. I didn't know about any of this till like a week ago. So I have no idea of what the city's timeline is. I have no idea if you discussed it again next month, whether that would be in time or whether that would be too late. I have no idea. You're absolutely right. People should have input.
Yeah, look, I think on the timing piece, again, things are moving fast. There's a small window here. And when we talk about the potential for commercial activity to resume in some fashion, again, we have to consider the fact that there could be a small window and a likely placement of some type of additional restriction or contraction of those restrictions when the flu season starts and we potentially have an uptick in cases. So I think the goal here is to try to create a framework and to advocate for an appropriate framework that considers all the stakeholders, residents, merchants, and property owners, and to get a plan in place that is temporary in nature. This is by no means a permanent solution. Really, the proposal here is focused on the warm weather months between June and September.
I understand, Paul. I feel very uncomfortable not discussing this framework or creating this framework without the other stakeholders involved. So,
thank you, Lee. I tend to be in agreement with you a little on it. Can I get an opinion from any of the other committee members? Crickets, or any of the committee members can chime in.
Don't they kick us out at 9:30?
You wish. I'll chime in. This is Ellen. I also sit on SLA, so we hear from the committee a lot, and I am pretty confident that they would be that Black associations, neighborhood associations all over would want to have their voices heard in this process. And I understand that there's a time sensitivity to it, but I think there's also a history of sort of opening a can of worms that, like Pandora's box, you can't put the monster back in once it's out. So
it's already out.
So, I mean, I don't want to exacerbate an already sensitive situation, right? So I want to be more educated about this, and as a resident of Chinatown, where if you hear noise from outside your window, it can come from a number of blocks away. It's just because we're so clustered in, right? So, and I live in a building where we have a lot of green space, right? And it's just the area that we're in, and it's just how noise bounces around. So as a resident, I am particularly sensitive to that, and I would like to hear more from other stakeholders, and I feel that this is a bit rushed. So I would prefer to be more educated about the situation before rushing this through, but also the resolution itself, it's very, to me, it's very unclear. It's very unspecific. So I'm not quite sure what it's really trying to say at the end of the day. Besides, yes, we need to support small businesses.
All right.
Well, I guess just to clarify, Paul, because I think it's an important point. Like, I understand the hesitation, right? And I got to say, for the record, right, what we're talking about here is saying very clearly, and I think we've tried to define it in the resolution, right, is that an establishment can use the parking spaces adjacent to their business to operate while there is restrictions placed on their inside operation, and doing so in the warm weather months. The concept of supporting the business community in a global pandemic where there is just undescribable suffering by the small merchant community, whether you're a shop owner or a restaurant, and the notion that we would not be in support of that honestly baffles me, and is something that I think that we should definitely continue to discuss. But clearly it might be something that is in the realm of the Economic Development Committee. I do think it's transportation related. And so that's why we wanted to come to you folks to be like, listen, we're asking for your support in exploring how this can work and pushing the city to put parameters on something, as opposed to just saying it's going to happen anyway, and you all having a conversation like we did with Open Streets, where they had rolled something out. So I think that was the impetus in trying to have that on this month's agenda, as June will be here very soon.
Thank you, Tim. Michelle, I know you wanted to say something. Right ahead.
Yeah. So I understand the concerns about this being somewhat rushed. I know we didn't have a lot of time to review it, but I tend to think that this is a sort of an unprecedented time. I think everyone would agree with that. And it pains me that our local merchants cannot operate in a way that they can even potentially stay afloat for a little while. And I had some reservations, but I spent some time today talking to people in my neighborhood who are business owners, just walking around with my dog. And I think Wellington also expressed this, that, businesses are willing to make some potential sacrifices when it comes to like deliveries or that kind of thing in order to have the physical space in order to operate their businesses, even if it's at part capacity. That was one of my main concerns, was about deliveries for these restaurants and bars and whatnot. But that does not seem to be a concern, because I think that there is a just sort of like a willingness to trade off right now. And especially since it is going to become harder and harder for folks to stay inside. I don't have any outdoor space personally. My building closed all the outdoor space. The only time I can go outside is to walk around, and I have nowhere to go really. So I can only imagine that there are many, many other people feeling that way. So it's not just for the businesses, it's also for the residents that lack any sort of outdoor exposure, and that will just get harder and harder. And the reality is they won't stay inside and they'll get more crowded. So for example, Tampa is allowing this type of thing. I don't want to be less creative and less forward thinking than Tampa. So I would ask people to think about this as sort of an unprecedented time. I have not seen a plan from the city about how we're going to make our lives better, but this, I think, is one tiny building block towards that. So I would urge people to think about it in that context.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. David, I know you had to want to say
Yeah. All right. I went back and forth. I changed my mind 3 times. This is very unlike me, even though I'm a Gemini. So I know it's because it's late. I haven't eaten dinner yet. But I think that I think it would be fine for us to pass this, and I support it. I don't know that this was the right committee to bring it to. Yes, it's street side parking, but as you launched into it, Tim, you were saying, measures that the community board has been comfortable with supporting in the past. And I was like, oh, wow, we're moving street side cafes into the street. And I was thinking about the 10 bars on my block and how I really wouldn't want all that loud music outdoors. It's terrible when they don't shut their French windows before. And I was thinking about these issues, but I don't think that is what is going to happen anywhere if we pass this, right? I really do think that it's allowing a couple parking spaces to be used for tables, and if it keeps the small businesses in place, and I agree we got to do it before June. So I'm for it.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you, Michelle. We heard from Lee, we heard from Ellen. That's 2-2. 2 on more information and 2 that we can go to tonight. But I guess I'm the tiebreaker. I guess, after thinking about it personally, I just didn't like that the resolution was thrown at us today, right? There was a debate whether this is the right committee or not for it, but at the same time, this is the unprecedented time we are in, and we want to start building blocks somewhere. So I'm for going with this. I guess at full board it'll have its questions, and we'll go from there.
It will be debated.
It will be debated. No, it'll be debated at full board, and let's start knocking this one out. So in the interest of time, since we're going to move forward with it for tonight. So let's get this motion going. Let's start reading it through, and
I can read.
Yeah, go ahead.
Resolution supporting expansion of open streets program and suggestions for, should we make it safe streets program?
Is that the official? Is it the official title, Safe Streets, or is it Open Streets?
Susan, is it?
I believe
it's Open Streets. It's Open Streets.
It's Open Streets. Okay, so it's changed.
Go ahead.
Open Streets. Okay.
Yeah,
Resolution supporting expansion of open streets program and suggestions for operating parameters of emergency outdoor space for commercial activity. Whereas the COVID-19 public health emergency has created a unique set of hardships for residents, merchants, and property owners. And whereas Community Board 3, specifically below East Towson Street, has limited amounts of public space, and whereas the need exists to ensure additional public space that can be used for both recreation and commerce in a responsible and appropriate manner, where social distancing can be maintained to ensure public health and well-being can be balanced with the need for resumption of economic activity. And whereas this need will continue in the short and medium terms as steps are taken to gradually resume activity levels dependent upon meeting local benchmarks associated with the phased reopening. And whereas there is a high likelihood that during this phased reopening, establishments indoor occupancy will be significantly limited, and whereas the Open Streets program recently launched has provided a pilot of how creative use of the roadway can provide opportunities for additional public space. Therefore, be it resolved, Community Board 3 supports the creative use of targeted portions of roadway to enhance public space through the construction and potential expansion of the Open Streets program. And be it further resolved, Community Board 3 supports additional program elements such as the use of parking spaces directly adjacent to establishments with limited occupancy for temporary use as outdoor seating, constrained to a similar method of operation they have for indoor space during a phased reopening. Be it further resolved, Community Board 3 supports an expansion of the current Open Streets operating area use be expanded, does that make sense? Of the current Open Streets operating area be expanded to include appropriate commercial activity and longer operating hours between the window of 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. daily. Be it further resolved that any such program expansion have appropriately predetermined use restrictions that align with an existing establishment's normal operation that encourage the resumption of commercial activity while ensuring limited disruption to residential quality of life that operate no later than midnight daily on sidewalks or within the roadbed directly adjacent to the establishment. And be it further resolved, Community Board 3 requests the city and state and their respective agencies with appropriate jurisdiction expeditiously work to enact these programs in the coming weeks to protect and support small merchants as they begin modified operations in the near future. And be it further resolved, Community Board 3 requests that any application and approval process required to execute an expanded program be simplified as to reduce the burden on the already struggling small merchant community. And be it further resolved, Community Board 3 requests its active and ongoing consultation and input into program parameters and how different program elements of the Open Space Initiative operates. Open Streets Initiative. Open Space. One thing I noticed in here is that in the fourth from the bottom paragraph, residential quality of life that operate no later than midnight, but the other section says 8 a.m. and 10 p.m.
Michael, can you move that up a little bit to the first page? Thank you.
Yeah, so if you see the first paragraph in the bottom is midnight, and then the second paragraph in the bottom is expand to 10 p.m. daily.
I apologize. It might have been a typo.
So I think we should change the midnight to 10 p.m.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So we adopt that change. Is there any other changes we want to make that we need to adopt? Or is this perfect, or is this good as is? David, do you think it's good as is, or is that
I like
thumbs
it.
up? Okay. Lee, Ellen, I know you're not fans of this right now, but is there anything you would want to change or adopt?
Fine as is.
Okay.
No.
Ellen? Okay. All right. If that's the only change, let's move this to a vote.
David Crane.
Yes.
Paul Rangel.
Yes.
Michelle Cooper-Smith. Yes. Lee Berman.
No.
Felicia Cruikshank. Ellen Liu.
No.
This motion passes. This resolution passes, excuse me.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. All right, that is the last resolution of the night. I think we had enough of a party tonight. want to say thank you for your time. I know tonight was not easy. It's the first time we've done it in 2 months. It's the first time I've actually really chaired this thing. Please, I'm hoping next time we can do it in a much shorter time. Thank you to the public for coming out tonight and offering your opinions and for staying on. Some of you who stayed on, there's still 23 participants, so that's pretty cool. Just know that there's going to be some other items being brought up in the June agenda, and we'd like for you to chime in on those. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Lee.
Second.
Aye.
All right, we're good. Thank you. And have a good night, everyone.
Stay
Good night.
safe. Take care.
Good night. Bye-bye.